Anyone lingering in the hallway? We're about ready to get started. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you to this tax town hall forum on flat tax and fair tax proposals to revise our tax code. We are engaging in a discussion with the assumption that a substantial overhaul of our tax system is necessary. If you don't believe that's the case, this may not be the forum for you. So we're starting with that assumption that there's indeed a dramatic need for substantive change in our tax code. Welcome. So glad you could join us. Before we get started, if you'd like to join us in a recital of the Pledge of Allegiance, we'd like for you to join us. Please stand. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. My name is Bill Yarbrough, and I have been graciously invited by the Zanesville Patriots to act as moderator for this afternoon's discussion. I am from Columbus, and I am a co-host of Liberty Radio Ohio, political talk for liberty-minded Buckeyes, and you can reach us at libertyradioohio.com. That's the only shameless plug for me personally that you'll hear this evening at libertyradioohio.com. What I would like to do before we get started is I would like to recognize some folks who had an opportunity to make this happen. I would like to recognize both Carol and Glenn Clay, who organized today's event, and thank them very much, as well as Kay Clymer, who's the leader of Zanesville Patriots, and the organization that she leads, and we're very, very thankful for the opportunity to have you host today's event. Briefly, I would like to introduce our panelists, and then from there discuss the kind of order of events, agenda for this afternoon. First of all, to my left, we have Stephen Curtis. Steve is the state director for the Americans for Fair Taxation for the state of Ohio. As such, he's involved in organizing grassroots support for passage of the fair tax, that legislation, and in conducting public education programs to increase public awareness of the advantages of the fair tax approach. Mr. Curtis is also president of Curtis Management, LLC, a safety and environmental consulting group, and he is degreed from Princeton University. So please welcome Steve Curtis. And to my right, we have Will Upton. Will is a state affairs manager at Americans for Tax Reform, where he works on tax policy issues in 16 states, including Ohio. Before joining Americans for Tax Reform, he previously worked with conservative activist and leader Richard Vigeri at conservativehq.com and at the American Conservative Magazine. And he is a graduate of Northwestern University. Please welcome Mr. Upton. And what I would also like to do is, just briefly, before we talk about the agenda today, is hand the microphone over to our gracious host, Kay Clymer, for a couple of words. Kay?
Okay, well, you've gotten the preliminary introductions, and I just have a few other things. Anybody who hasn't signed a coal card, please do that, COAL. It goes to the EPA by May 15th. You don't even have to put postage. You can leave it, we'll take care of it, or you can stick it in the mail. The other thing is there's 2 petitions out there, one for personhood amendment, and this says life begins at the moment of conception, and the other petition, since Gary can't hear me, is the workplace freedom amendment. So you can ask about that and sign if you have not done that. The third thing is that we do have some candidates here. We have 2. Judy Zell, who's running for State Central Committee in District 20, and Jim Hiles, who is running for the male position of State District 20 State Central Committee. These are very, very, very important positions. They set the tone for what we do here in Ohio. And they have a table out there. They're more than welcome to talk with you, so please see them. Do we have a moment that we could have them come up, or they come up, both up, or do you want to?
Certainly, if you'd like to come up
Okay.
just for a moment, introduce yourself.
Jim and Judy, you come up, please. We have some information out there at the table. There's free information. You may take any of it. We do have the Ohio Constitution for $3 and the United States Constitution for $5. Those are the things that we charge. So if you see those items, you may take anything on the tall or round table. It's free. Here, this is Judy. Yes.
I am Judy Zell, and I am a State Central Committee candidate for District 20. And my husband and I have been in the county of Hocking for 20 years now. Wife, mother, business owner, love my country. Got my first taste of the political process as a senior in high school. I was a delegate to Girls State, and the very first night, I didn't know what I was going to do when I got there. I didn't know all the process, but there was a position to run for the caucus leader for our city, Sherwood. And I thought, I think I'd like that. So I got up and I ran for that position, and I was elected to that position. And I had a ball. And our party swept that election. We took all the positions, and that was my first taste. I'd love for you to stop out. You can talk with us, but something that so many of us have just been looking for a way to get involved, make change. And 2 years ago, I had said something to one of our Central Committee members that I should just run for State Central Committee when it comes up the next time. And she says, I think you should, Judy. And I am the president of the Hocking County Women's Republican Club. I'm on the executive committee of the Republican Party in Hocking County. And I'm also a co-founder and on the board of the Hocking Hills Tea Party Patriots. And we are very involved. We have 3 beautiful children and 11 grandbabies. And I tell people, is there not a cause? That is my heart. I love my country. I love my America. And we are Ohio, the heart of it all. We have to get Ohio right for this body, this country to function. Thank you for your time, and I applaud you all for being here on a Saturday afternoon and taking the time to learn of this important topic. Thank you.
Well, my name is Jim Hiles, and I'm also a candidate for Republican Party State Central Committee. I'm a little bit different kind of a candidate because I'm not a politician. I'm not going to come up and tell you that I've got this brand new answer that's going to fix everything and all the problems and all of the ills of Ohio. I don't. I have a very old idea. It's called our state constitution, our federal constitution, and maybe a little bit newer idea, the 2012 Republican Party platform. These are important documents. If you, I'm more than sure most of you are very familiar with the constitutions, but I encourage you to take a look at that 2012 Republican National Platform. A lot of good stuff. A lot of good stuff. I'm not going to take your time going over the finer points of that. I am a small business owner. I use that term loosely. I could probably coin the term micro business owner. And somebody had asked me at one point in time if I would ever consider running for a public office. I gave a specific weather condition in a certain location. And this winter, with the way it went, I looked at the forecast for Detroit and I said, well, close enough. So therefore I am running, and like I said, I'm just, anybody that knows me knows that I had to dig pretty far through the closet to find this, past the camouflage and the t-shirts and stuff. I'm just a working man that is tired of seeing my country and my state go in this direction. It's time for somebody to do something. I kept saying that. Somebody's got to do something. And I realized, oops, that somebody may be me. So that's why I'm running. I hope you will consider supporting me. We do have an uphill fight. We are not, myself in particular, the Republican Party established favorites in this race. So we will need a lot of help going forward. I thank you for your time. I thank you for coming out this afternoon, and hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Okay, so our plan this afternoon, Steve, I have you come forward again. You look like you've been shoved to the back of the class here. Our plan is dependent upon you and your participation. After two brief 15-minute opening statements and a couple moments apiece for each of these gentlemen to rebut each other, and this will go by very quickly, just from an educational perspective, to understand what is the flat tax, what is the fair tax, what does that mean definitionally, is that we're going to turn it over to you. It's going to be extraordinarily important that whatever questions you have, that you bring them to the forefront, so this could truly be as educational as it was intended to be. We'll talk about the logistics of asking those questions once we get through the opening statements, but start thinking about it now. What questions do you have about the fair tax, about flat tax philosophies, and then we'll go from there. So to begin, we'll start with 15 minutes, kind of opening statements, if you will, education about their respective positions, and we'll start advocating for, by flip of the coin, by advocating for the fair tax, Steve Curtis, for 15 minutes. Steve, floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, and I think I'll point out it was my coin. Actually, before I get started, I want to say that I was very impressed by the two folks that just spoke here for their candidacies towards precinct, because those...
Go ahead and hold it.
May need to turn that one off.
Mine's off.
Okay. Those are the kind of folks that actually played a role in the formation of our country. People who are willing to take their time, their personal life, their personal treasure, I'm sure you're putting something into it, in order to serve their country. In order to serve their country. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
In order to serve their country, as opposed to what we see so much of today, which is people who are using government as a way to take from the people and enrich themselves. So let me give you a salute, if you will, for the efforts that you're making. Along those lines, I'd like to take us back a little bit and point out that for 100 years, we didn't have an income tax. And during that time, we went from a bunch of colonies, backwoods people, to one of the greatest nations in the world, possibly the greatest nation in the history of the world. We did things like educating our children, defending our borders, growing and developing businesses, creating an environment where people weren't afraid to go ahead and try and start a new business, to create something better, to serve their fellow man. We did all of that without an income tax. We've only had an income tax for about 100 years. In fact, the history of the income tax going way back is not real well. The first income tax back in China, after a few years, they beheaded the guy who put it in, which is probably something we ought to think about in this country. So, and they tried it in England, and they hated it so much that after a few years, they burned every scrap of paper that had the word income tax on it. So the income tax has not done well throughout history. And it hasn't done well for our country since 1913, when the 16th Amendment was passed. The income tax started out small, and it's grown to a behemoth, to the point now where it is strangling America, the American economy, the American worker, and the future of America's children. The income tax, simply put, is one of the most destructive things our country has ever experienced. And we are living today with the consequences of what those people did 100 years ago. We propose getting rid of it. The fair tax, simply put, is a replacement for the income tax. We repeal the income tax, we eliminate the income tax, we eliminate the IRS, and we replace it with a single retail sales tax on all new goods and services. If you buy it and it's new, you will pay the fair tax. If you buy it and it's used, you don't pay any tax. It applies to everything. And that means there's no selling of congressmen to manipulate a tax code, because everybody gets treated the same. There's one rate, it applies to everything, new goods and services. No manipulation. The corruption we are seeing playing out in Washington today would end. The kind of selling of congressmen for campaign contributions to lobbyists would end, because there would be no federal income tax code to manipulate. The fair tax, as I said, is very simple. It would be administered, if you will, by the states. We would not have a federal bureaucracy running the fair tax. You would walk into your store, your grocery store, you would buy your gallon of milk, the store would collect the fair tax. Every month, they would bundle up the fair tax they collected, they would send it to the state. But they would actually get paid to do so. 0.25% of what they collected would reimburse them for their efforts. Unlike the millions of unpaid tax collectors we have out there now, we're going to be free and open and transparent about it. They're collecting taxes, they're going to get paid to do so. The state would take the money they collect from the individual businesses, they would bundle it up, and they would send it to Washington. Which means all we really need in Washington is some guy with a checklist that says, oh, Ohio sent their money in this month. We don't need 100,000 people trying to run the country from Washington. We can do a better job here, in Ohio, in Zanesville, as opposed to 130,000 IRS agents in Washington right now. In addition to being simple, the fair tax is incredibly efficient. Right now, the income tax system, which is horribly inefficient, loses $350 billion a year to what we call the tax gap, uncollected taxes. And that doesn't even count the 26,000 tax returns they sent to one address down in Georgia, and they gave away $42 million of your money. Okay, everybody hear about that?
I know the states have the same problem.
Yeah. So, $350 billion tax gap. In addition, how many people pay someone to do their taxes? Or how many people spend a whole weekend doing their taxes? Okay? Americans spend or lose in productivity over $450 billion every year. Every year we give away $450 billion in order to comply with our income taxes. 350, 450. Golly, we're starting to talk about real money now. And that doesn't even mention the nearly $500 billion that businesses lose every year due to lost opportunity because of our income tax code. Businesses make bad decisions, not because they're stupid, but because they have to do it because of the income tax code. If you add those all up, every year over $1 trillion is sucked out of the economy because of our income tax code. Guess what? Under the fair tax, that would be like $1 trillion stimulus every year. We just sold our children's future to China for $800 billion once. With the fair tax, we are providing $1 trillion of stimulus every year for American businesses and American workers. Now, what will that do? And by the way, these aren't guesses. We have spent, AFFT, Americans for Fair Taxation, over $25 million researching this. We looked at it. We asked the questions and said, well, what is it going to do? Well, that stimulus will create 10 million new jobs. We're talking about getting excited about creating 200,000 jobs. Think about that, 10 million new jobs for the kids coming out of school, for the people that have been laid off, for the folks that want a little extra money in their retirement. 10 million new jobs. We're talking about increasing the economic level from a measly 2% if we're lucky. Everybody see that 2% GDP increase? Pretty anemic, pretty sad when you think about the economic engine America has been, that we get excited about breaking 2%. Under the fair tax, we're looking at a 6% average over the next decade after the passage of the fair tax. How do we know this? We went to foreign companies and we said, what will you do if we pass the fair tax? We talked to 500 of them. 400 of them said, I will build my next factory in America. The other 100 said, I will close down my company in this country and I will move my entire organization to America if you pass the fair tax. When we think about what the fair tax will do for America and America, it is unbelievable. One of the biggest problems we face in society is our poor. And I will proffer to you that the income tax system not only creates poor, it keeps people poor. We penalize anyone who tries to work their way out of poverty. The more they work, the harder they work, the more the government takes from them. Under the fair tax, it doesn't happen. If you work, if you earn, you keep every penny you earn because there's no payroll tax. There's no withholding. You keep your whole paycheck. So for someone who's poor, they could be looking at an immediate 10, 15, as much as 25% increase in the amount of money they have. Simply put, the fair tax may be the one weapon that allows us to win the war on poverty. Because it puts money into the hands of the poor and gives them a chance, finally, to break out of the debt cycle, to break out of the poverty cycle that goes from generation to generation. Because if you give people the money to build the capital, to educate their children and provide them with opportunities, now instead of being doomed to a life of poverty, that son or their daughter has a chance to break out of what the government is holding them in with the income tax bill. So when I look at the fair tax, I don't just see dollars going to working America. I see the opportunity for people who have been denied a chance to actually have one, to be part of that growing economy. There's a lot of other things I can talk about in terms of the fair tax, in terms of what it does for businesses, what it does for retirees. By the way, people on Social Security will not be hurt by the fair tax because whatever changes in the cost of living come as a result of the imposition of the fair tax, it will be compensated for by changes in the Social Security payment. One of the nice things for people on Social Security, instead of now having about maybe 100 million people contributing to Social Security with their payroll taxes, you will have 320 million people providing Social Security revenue every time they make a purchase. So not only do we protect people that are on Social Security, we also protect the concept of Social Security by broadening the base and providing a more steady revenue stream. One of the things I didn't talk about, and Glenn down here I'm sure is fidgeting because under the fair tax, we remove all of the currently hidden embedded taxes in goods and services. So right now, if you go buy a gallon of milk and it costs $2, about 20% of that is really the result of the income tax system. Those taxes are hidden, embedded in the cost of that good or service. Under the fair tax, they disappear. So that gallon of milk now, instead of costing $2, would be $1.60. Now, we're going to add the fair tax on top of that. So the price will be about the same, but you now have your whole paycheck to pay for it. So, under the fair tax, the cost of goods and services stays about the same. You have more money to make the decisions about how and when you pay your taxes. If you want to, you can buy everything new, you can pay a lot of taxes. If you choose, you can buy everything used, although I don't recommend used food. Not a real good idea. But other than that, you decide, like it was 200 years ago, the people decide what the government gets, not what the government is going to pay. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think our AV person, when I was talking, I must not have had it close enough because he wanted to turn it up. I think that's why your microphone reacted differently from when we tested it. So I think if we keep it really far away, it might work, or we can turn it off. I think you obviously have a booming voice. We'll give Will his opportunity to decide how he wants to proceed with that. So I'll turn it over to Will for 15 minutes.
I'm going to try the mic. So, I have a little bit of a cold. Voice is a little weak. So one of the big issues we need to deal with is, of course, tax reform. That's what I spend most of my days dealing with on the state level.
Yeah, same problem. All right, I'm going to try to boom it a little bit. I focus on tax reform on the state level. Things have been really busy, really interesting right now because on the federal level, we've basically reached political gridlock. Barring the 2014 elections, we may or may not be able to retake the U.S. Senate. Even then, we still have a Democratic president that's not interested in actual concrete tax reform. Until we get that, until we get people on the same page, it's going to be very hard to implement either a fair tax or a flat tax. So I look at things at the state level. On the state level, we currently have 24 state governments completely controlled by Republicans. That's governor, that's state senate, that's state house. In the case of Nebraska, they only have one, their unicameral legislature, so it's the governor and the legislature. The Democrats have 13. We are basically in a perfect test phase where we have the red state agenda, and where red states are moving, we have the blue state agenda, where blue states are moving. We are moving towards lower, flatter fare. In the case of Kansas, it's a state that's moving much more towards a fair tax model. In this case of North Carolina, for instance, they're recently moving towards a flat tax. Democrat states like Illinois, California, Connecticut, Maryland are moving towards higher taxes, higher regulation, and more cost of people living in the states. What are we seeing? We're seeing people move out. They're moving into red states. They're getting out. They're leaving. California's losing population. Maryland's losing population. Connecticut's losing population. Illinois is losing population. Now, we're here to talk about what model is right. Fair tax, flat tax. I think overall, the actual model that's right is for the federal government, in whatever form it is, leads. This is something that my boss from Northwest talks a lot about. He said there's two coalitions in America. There's the Leave Us Alone coalition. Those are gun owners, homeschoolers, anti-tax activists, people of faith. And then there's the Takers coalition, or as Grover likes to refer to them as competing parasites. The goal of tax reform ACORN, community organizers. And eventually what ends up happening is you have League of Sloan Coalition, we're all happy, the government's off our back. You get the Takers Coalition, it's competing parasites, and all of a sudden they start looking around the table at each other. And they say, wait a minute, those guys are getting a bunch of money. So then they start eating each other. And by the time you see them again, they're a little bit shorter and they're missing some limbs. Lips with that joke, grower. But that is our goal. I think one of the biggest issues, though, is this idea of gridlock on the federal level. Listen, we're not going to get any comprehensive tax reform, whether it's a fair tax, whether it's a flat tax in the form like Oliver Bush got, which has been pushed by the Hoover Institution, whether it's the Milton Friedman negative income tax. We're not going to get that probably within the next 4 years, maybe not the years after. Where the real fight is in the state level. And what we're seeing on the states is they're moving towards, red states, which are moving towards a zero income tax. Now how they get there is what's up for debate. Kansas, again, is moving towards more of a consumption tax. It's not necessarily a fair tax. They will continue to have property taxes, but they're becoming more reliant on their state sales tax. They're expanding the base of the state sales tax. Who gets hit with it? And this past year, the state sales tax is supposed to drop from 6.3% to 5.7%. We cut a compromise with the legislature, ended up at 6.15% sales tax. In exchange, we got further income tax rate reductions. 4 years ago, Kansas' income tax rates were at 6.75%, 6.15%. Don't remember the rest off the top of my head. But it dropped down to 3.9 was the bottom rate. There are 5 brackets. Today there are 2 brackets. Top rate 3.9%, bottom rate 2.3%. The goal is to phase out entirely and get to 0. North Carolina is another state. They had a top rate of 6.15%. Had 3 or 4 brackets, I believe. They're now pushing towards a flat rate, eventually being right around 5% state income tax rate. Ohio, for instance, Ohio has 9 income tax brackets. 9. One of the most graduated systems in the country. Governor Kasich has been looking at tax reform. We're reducing rates. We're not consolidating brackets. Consolidating brackets is key. We need to consolidate brackets as well. Simplify the tax code. That's the goal of the flat tax. Flat tax means to simplify the code, break one flat rate, takes care of everything. Everybody pays the rate. Everybody knows what they're paying. Hall and Bush like to joke that you can file their flat tax plan on the back of the postcard. That's all it takes. There are 7 states actually who have flat tax in place in some form. Illinois, Massachusetts, Colorado, Indiana, Michigan, and a handful of others. Michigan, we've actually been able to ratchet down rates. Indiana, we've actually ratcheted down that flat rate. Colorado's been kind of at the same rate for a while now. They actually also have a table law on the books. There were some issues when we implemented it. It got some old code in it. It's a little bit weaker than we'd like. Tabor is the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. It basically does not let government spending grow beyond the population rate of inflation. And that's something that I think is key that we need on a national level. Because this isn't just about tax rates, it's also about spending and how much the government can spend. And that's one thing about the flat tax, is we're actually trying to roll back the size and scope of government. I think there are some issues with the fair tax and whether or not it actually does achieve that. For instance, the fair tax does implement a rebate system. So it's a rebate calculated, because there's an argument of regressivity. Amongst people below the poverty line, they tend to consume a lot more than Bill Gates or Warren Buffett do. Once you reach a certain income level, you tend to start pushing more of your income into savings. That wouldn't be hit by the consumption tax. And most flat tax models that wouldn't be hit either, actually. But amongst the very poor, they tend to consume a lot more because they need to. They don't have that much money. So as a solution, the fair tax group came up with this rebate system. It's basically a monthly rebate that everybody would receive, no matter your income status. And it's calculated off the 23% tax rate, sales tax rate, and that monthly poverty line calculation. Now, to me, that is a massive expansion of the federal government and a new entitlement that's going to be looked at by people as not a tax return, but as an income. The government's now giving you income. That, for me, scares me. Somebody who believes in the League of Sloan Coalition, I don't want the federal government having that control. In order to get it, you're going to submit your name, address, social security number. Everybody's going to need a social security number, even children. That, especially with some of the NSA issues right now, scares me. That's why I tend to lean more towards the flat tax. But again, I also think we can experiment here. I think we have that opportunity to control 24 state governments. I would like to see a state actually enact a fair tax on the state level, see what it does economically. I think that's a very important thing. I think we can push more states towards flat tax too. And we're seeing a big push towards zero. So we are getting towards more of a fair tax model at the state level. Federally, again, we've got some time to deal with. The other big issue I think we have to look at, really considering the fair tax, is what the real rate actually is. Rates calculated as tax inclusive, which is the way income taxes are currently calculated. Most sales tax at the state level are calculated tax exclusive. So you pay the tax based on what the price is. Under the fair tax model, if you bought something for $1, your total, plus including your tax burden, would be $1.30. 23% is calculated off of that point, that 30 cents being 23% of the $1.30. That's tax included. If you calculate it as an actual sales tax, it would be a 30% tax rate. Most polling shows Americans would not be too apropos to exchanging an income tax for a sales tax model over anything like 20%. Beyond that is, you mentioned, as Steve mentioned, is that new products will be taxed, used products won't. We get into a very big issue with home sales here. The fair tax ends up becoming an inherent huge burden on young people and people looking to purchase their first home. They're paying the brunt of the tax. People who are buying a used home, pre-owned home, aren't paying that tax. Okay? So we live in a country now, we just got out of a housing bubble, there's a plethora of homes for sale. Pre-owned homes for sale. None of that will be taxed. Any new construction will be taxed because it's a new home sale. And it discourages new construction. It discourages the construction business. It's actually hurting the entire sector of the American economy. I think it's something to consider. Another issue is how much of GDP does the fair tax actually capture? Currently, the argument is somewhere around 80%. The only because we have not seen the fair tax at the state level yet, or in any other country. We don't have a real true analogous model to look at. Closely as the European VAT, value-added tax. It's basically a tax on each stage of production that just gets pushed on until the final is collected at retail and at final sale. Even the most efficient VAT models in Europe get about 38% of GDP, not 80%. So if you're doing that, you're looking at possibly doubling that rate. We're not talking 30%, we're talking 60% tax rate in order to capture the 80% of GDP needed to replace the income tax. Again, this is not saying that I think the fair tax has a lot of merit to it. I think that getting rid of income taxes is one of the most important things we should be working on right now. I just don't see how it's going to happen yet on the federal level. And I want to see the economics of the fair tax work itself out. And I think the state level is the best place to do it. Again, I would recommend, and we're seeing some of it in Kansas. Governor Brown back in Kansas is actually a huge flat tax guy. And yet he's out there pushing fair tax, basically. He's pushing for taxation on consumption, no income taxes. And it's doing wonders. I mean, the state's added over 2,000 new jobs in the past quarter. They're exceeding revenue projections. They're actually increasing state revenue and decreasing spending, which is the other side of this whole coin. I don't think it's just enough to replace the income tax and the current rate of revenue coming into the federal government as it is. We need to reduce the size and scope of the government. Government needs to be smaller. That's the key. And until we're able to do that, we won't change anything in America. The government will still be able to use the EPA as a regulatory bully going around shutting down coal plants. The government will still be able to use NSA, Target Services. They use NSA now to find people's farms and make sure they're not growing the wrong crops. Make sure they're not doing this or that. They can use the federal government currently as a tool. And keeping it at its current size is not good enough. We need to shrink the size of government. So we advocate American tax reform, not necessarily for a flat tax or a fair tax, but for lowering the rates, consolidating the rates, and lowering the overall tax burden on Americans to cut spending. We want to cut spending in the end. If you cut taxes, it forces the government to cut spending. Either they can keep borrowing or they can cut spending. And eventually, no one's going to give the money. They're going to have to cut spending. We've seen it in Kansas. We've seen it in North Carolina. Governor Scott Walker has done amazing things in Wisconsin. He has cut spending, he has cut taxes in 3 years by $2 billion. He's got another $500 million in tax reform through income tax cuts and property tax reform. And that's what I think that we need to be focused on. Looking at the state level, the states is kind of our laboratory about what we can get done in the future. Because right now we've got gridlock in Washington, we've got a lot of issues that are working themselves out. And you're always going to have some issues with the political class especially, and lobbyists, and even if it's a fair tax, if it's a flat tax, people are going to want exemptions from it, people are going to want deductions from it. You're going to have corporations come in and say, well, really we shouldn't be, taxed, our purchases should be taxed, here's why, and they'll go get some money with you congressman, and they'll try to amend it, and they'll try to change the system. We see that already with the current income tax, people do it with sales tax, people get exempted from the sales tax all the time. You're going to have a lot of companies that will try to game it. You have manufacturers who will purchase something and argue that it's for production, so it doesn't fall under consumption tax. And then once they decide, oh, it's not going to be production anymore. The question here is the retailer responsible for paying the tax? Is the manufacturer responsible? That's something I think we need to work out. That's why I think we need to really focus on the state level, implement the fair tax on the state level, see how consumption taxes will work in America, and take this argument from being an academic argument and actually put economic theory into practice and see where we're at. We've done that somewhat with the flat tax. We haven't gotten there entirely. A lot of states have flat taxes, still have a sales tax, we'll still have a property tax, but we're getting there. And I think we need to get there with consumption, and I think consumption taxes can be a road to the future. But I would like to see it in practice. And I'd like to see where we can get on the state level. We've got a few states that don't have income taxes right now. Texas, Washington State, Tennessee, Alaska, but they're heavily reliant on oil revenue. Texas is heavily reliant on oil revenue. Alaska is heavily reliant on oil revenue. Washington State has one of the worst property tax regimes in the country because they don't have income taxes. Tennessee has a lot of mineral revenue, a lot of coal revenue, a lot of oil revenue. I would like to see a state, and I think Kansas is one that can really do this, base itself off of the consumption tax without that revenue from natural resources. And I think that's where we're at, and I think that's what we should be looking at in the future.
So we're going to have a quick 5-minute rebuttal for each, but I'll pause again just to say that from there on out, it's run by you. So hopefully you've got your questions brewing. I've already started to take note of some questions that I want to ask if you don't come first with yours. Also, did we have note cards available as well?
Yes, they've been given out.
So
Does
note
anybody
cards.
have one?
If anybody does not have a note card, in other words, you don't feel comfortable standing up and asking a question, but you have one, Kay will make sure you get a note card. So that's also a possibility. And you can return it to Kay as well if you don't even want to walk it up and place it here at the front of the stage. That's fine as well if you're not comfortable asking your question. But get them ready because that's going to be very important for the next portion of the program. So let me hand it back to Steve now for 5 minutes.
I want at least 10.
You get 5. You get 5, sir.
I say that because Will actually did a very nice job of raising some good questions. And I want to answer them with respect to the fair tax. He's absolutely right. We're not going to get the fair tax passed in the next couple of months. It's going to take a plan. And we have a plan. It's called 218, 60, and 1. 218 in the House, 60 in the Senate, 1 in the White House. That's what it takes to pass any piece of legislation, whether it's the flat tax or the fair tax. Now, we're not going to do that in one election cycle. It is important, and one reason we're having these kinds of sessions, that you start making the fair tax the issue. In the primaries and in the general elections, every candidate should be afraid to stand up and say he does not support the fair tax. Because we're going to have to replace a lot of people in Congress with fair tax supporters for the fair tax to be passed. 218, 60, and 1. Now we've got a pretty decent start. We've got 78, I believe now, co-sponsors already in the House. So we're making pretty good progress. And as I was telling Bill a little earlier, if you run on the fair tax, you win elections. So it is a very doable plan. 2014, kick out some incumbents, replace them with the fair tax supporters, set the stage for making the fair tax one of the primary issues for debate in the 2016 election. Make the people that are running for the highest office in the land answer to the people that are going to have to live under the laws. Make them answer the question about the fair tax. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, did anybody get money back last year on their tax return? Get a refund? Okay? That's what the prebate is. It is a refund of money that was incorrectly collected. It's not welfare, it's not a handout, it's your money being returned to you. Okay? It's just a simple way of getting the money back to you that was collected as taxes on purchases below the poverty level. So the prebate was put in there to address the issue of regressivity, which is a very valid point, but it is not a form of welfare. It's your money being returned to you. What were some of the other things you said? No, he did a very good job, actually. It was a pleasure to listen to him. A couple of the other items, the issue of who runs the tax collection system. Okay, it is not going to be run out of the federal office. It's going to be run by the states. So when we talk about people escaping the tax or being able to play games, you're not trying to fool some bureaucrat sitting 300, 400, 500 miles away. You're going to be trying to fool the people sitting in Columbus, which are 20, 30 minutes away. So the ability to enforce the fair tax is going to be significantly improved over what we have now. More importantly, it takes two people to cheat under the fair tax. You, if you're the purchaser, and the person you're trying to buy it from. Okay, would you sell this to me without applying the fair tax because I'm a nice guy? Kay's going to look at me and said, you realize I could go to jail if I do that? And she said, no, I don't like you that much. Unlike the current system, how many people think drug dealers file tax returns? Okay? They don't. Criminals don't file tax returns, so they get away with it. Because it only takes one person to cheat. Under the fair tax, it takes two, and the people that are going to be enforcing it are going to be closer. Now, he made one other comment which I thought was really interesting. That we haven't really tried the idea of the fair tax. Florida doesn't have an income tax. Texas doesn't have an income tax. And yeah, they have other sources of revenue, but golly gee, so is the federal government. So the issue of does it work, that's already a done deal. It's been proven. Thank you.
You guys are great stewards of the time. I can tell you were itching to say even more, but thank you for that. So we can keep moving.
She's carrying.
Yeah, she's carrying. Okay, 5 minutes. Bill.
I think one of the big issues is we've seen, to an extent, especially in Eastern Europe, actually, some of this idea of flat tax being enacted. It has, honestly, looking at IMF studies, been hit or miss. Estonia and Latvia have had a little bit more success than, say, Russia. Albania has actually had some mild success with the flat tax system. Just to address that, I think as far as the prebates go, the big issue there, though, is that it's not necessarily a return of people's tax dollars. It's a calculation based off of what the 23% rate is and the poverty line. And then the money is given back to the people based off of basically, it's to address the regressivity issue. Unlike the tax return, it's not a windfall that occurs or a net loss that occurs at the end of the year. I owe the IRS $64. I kind of almost nailed it. I was talking to a guy the other day, actually, in Governor Kasich's office, who owes the IRS $1. I'm kind of jealous. He actually really pretty much got the whole thing perfect. That occurs once a year, at the end of the year. This comes out every month. The rebate comes every month, like a welfare check, like Social Security same, it's not necessarily the same thing, but it will be viewed as the same thing. I think that's an inherently dangerous idea. That's a problem. Now, the other big issue is, again, I think, and it was kind of mentioned a little bit before, there's no, where prices will end up once you remove some of the hidden taxes from the tax code, and some of the increase in prices due to income tax, due to corporate income taxes, things like that. There's an argument that prices will fall somewhat around 22%. If prices fall, that means wages have to fall. Economically speaking, wages are inherently rigid. We saw this in the Great Depression, actually. We saw prices fall. People didn't want their wages to fall. You had massive strikes. Wages didn't fall. Creates an economic shock, sent the U.S. into a depression. Now, part of the reason that happened was the Federal Reserve, something we have not talked about yet. The Federal Reserve did not do a very good job of creating liquidity in the market and actually battling that depression with inflation. We needed some inflation. We needed price inflation to accommodate for the rigidity in wages and wages not profit. Now, what would happen if we instituted the fair tax is we saw price drop. You're not going to see a wage drop, and the feds are going to create liquidity in the market and create inflation in order to accommodate that price drop to prevent an economic shock. So in the end, a lot of this, while you're stripping away power from the federal government, you're still leaving money, you're still leaving power in the hands of the feds. In the end, some of it comes down to monetary policy. You can't control what the Fed's actions are. And I think that's something to be concerned about. The Fed's still going to be around. It would be nice to create a system, and flat tax doesn't necessarily do it either, where we can limit the Fed authority and create more oversight with the Fed. Rand Paul's done a very good job of bringing attention to that, but we're not quite there yet. I think we'll get there. Lastly, one very positive aspect of the flat tax is, let's say you own a corporation, Acme Corp. You have a 15% flat tax in the country. There's actually a way to shrink. It's estimated right now about 130 million entities in the United States pay the IRS some type of income tax. Flat tax can shrink that down to about 8 million. So let's say you own Acme Corp, you pay $3 million in income, or you have $3 million in revenue. $2 million of it go into wages, $1 million of it goes into expenses that are deemed not approved. So you got $3 million, flat tax rate of 15%. That would actually be calculated as $3 million plus $2 million plus 1, 15%, that puts you at $900,000 would be the tax burden. That doesn't just cover the corporation, that covers every single employee, that's all the wage, that's taxes on wages, everything. Corporation pays that, and it's done. No one else, you as an individual have no interaction at all with the IRS. There's no control over you, no interaction. It's all through that corporate entity. That's one model, one way of doing it. Whether or not that's the way we go, I don't know. And again, I think at the federal level, I don't think it's just the White House, 60 in the Senate, and 218 in the House. I think regardless of which way we go, we're going to need very large majorities in both houses, or some Democrats that really come around to our side, which we saw in 84 to an extent with Tip O'Neill, really driving some reform in the House. But again, for a massive shift in how the U.S. does business, we're going to see a very large Republican majority in both the House and the Senate and the White House.
Okay, so are you itching as much as I am with questions? Because I got them, but I would much prefer to hear from you, and let me just play traffic cop. So, who has a question? Now, let me just preface this by saying that whatever you ask, even if you choose to direct it towards one of our panelists, both are going to have an opportunity to discuss, talk on that topic. And I've already admonished both these gentlemen that please not wax poetic for its own sake. That once the question's been answered, so that we can get through as many of these questions as possible. I'm not going to set an arbitrary time limit. The purpose of this is educational and to thoroughly answer the question. So I think setting an arbitrary limit is counterproductive, but at the same time, I will call foul if I feel I need to call foul. So we'll go from there. So, questions. Does anybody have one out of the gate? Yeah. Would you care to ask it, or would you like me to ask it for you?
Mike, would you like to present?
You'd like to present it to me, okay?
My name is Michael Ryan.
Okay.
I live here in Zanesville, Ohio. I'm in Zanesville,
take the microphone?
No, I don't think I need to do it.
Okay.
Yes, you do.
Well, perhaps you do. Just if you hold it far away, it'll amplify you just enough. Just hold it down to your chest.
My question is simple. I was stationed in Spain. Okay, they had this type of system that you're talking about. If you bought a $500 car, you were taxed $500. So the car would actually cost you $1,000. What controls will this system put on our government, our Congress, our House, and whatever, to ensure that the value that they take out in taxes will be, I don't want to see them destroy America, because I don't trust these people in office today. And basically, I think this is something you ought to check out, because if you start purchasing anything that's new, it's good in that if you can't afford it, you don't have to pay taxes. So now the poor will not get the same service as the rich does, because the rich can afford to pay the tax, and you can't if it's double what it is.
Great question. Thank you. So I heard a couple different things there, and we'll start with Steve. Let's go back to this issue of regressivity, which I think is where he ended. That is the number one issue that I hear from the left, both on a fair tax and on a flat tax, is the whole idea that when you have a single rate that everybody pays, or a single consumption tax that everybody pays, it naturally is going to hit the poor substantially worse than someone in the upper part of the income bracket. So that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question, and hopefully I'm articulating this correctly, is what is going to keep the government, even if we take care of the regressivity issue, what's going to keep the government from oppressively, willy-nilly, upping that rate to the point where even if we have a regressivity measure in place, that it becomes oppressive? So we'll start with you, Steve.
The problem with the regressivity is that if I'm poor and I'm spending all of my money just to survive, the poverty rate is about 11,600 for a single individual. That if I go and buy milk and I pay a lot of tax when I buy that milk, my purchasing power is reduced because of the tax. The fair tax deals with that very specifically and very directly. We don't tax anybody on their purchases up to the poverty level, and the mechanism for doing that is a rebate. So in essence, if I'm a single individual living at the poverty level, or a family living at the poverty level, I pay zero taxes, even though I'm handing the money out, and I still see what the government is taking away. I get the money back. So the fair tax is designed to focus and make sure that nobody, rich or poor, pays a penny in taxes until they have taken care of themselves and their family. Okay, and we do that by not taxing anybody, rich or poor, on their purchases up to the poverty level. So whether you're living under a bridge, or you're Bill Gates, or Warren Buffett spending hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, you don't pay a penny on your purchases up to the poverty level. And there's a very important philosophical point I want to bring into this. We don't believe that you come second. Under the current system, the government takes from you what they decide, and you get what's left of the money you earn. Your take home is nowhere near what you earn. You're number 2 on the list. Under the fair tax, you're number 1. You take care of yourself first. You take care of your family first. And then, as you earn more and you spend more and start rising above the poverty level, now you begin contributing to the necessary functioning of government. Okay, so on a philosophical basis, we're changing the dynamic from government up here and you're down here getting the leftovers to you take care of yourself. You come first under the fair tax, and the government gets what you're willing to spend above the poverty level on the purchases of new goods and services.
That's good, and we'll come back to what measures are in place to prohibit that rate from just inching up over and over again. Well, let's come back to that one, but let's stay on regressivity so that we can do point-counterpoint here. Both fair tax regressivity as well as regressivity complaints about the flat tax. Can you speak to both?
Yeah. Regressivity is an issue. I would argue that under the current income tax system, especially, a lot of liberals like to argue that they like the progressive income tax, the graduated income tax for the richest. However percent pay X number of dollars, and all the way down to where the very poor pay no taxes. They like to argue that this is the most humane way of dealing with taxation in the world. What they don't like to talk about is the fact that the category of largest employers in America are actually S corps and LLCs. They don't pay corporate income tax; they pay personal income tax. They usually fall into that top half of the brackets. These are the biggest job creators in America. They're the ones getting taxed the most. We can't hire as many people. I call that pretty regressive myself. People want to work; they can't work because there aren't jobs because of the way the liberals have structured the tax code. Flat tax, a lot of people like to argue is regressive. One proposal, the left likes to argue is regressive. One proposal was put forward by economist Milton Friedman, Freedom and Capitalism. Dr. Friedman was a University of Chicago economics professor. He's advised everybody from Ronald Reagan to Augusto Pinochet in Chile. He's written extensively. He's one of the great free market economists of the center right in America. Milton Friedman actually developed a system he called the negative income tax. It's a flat tax system that has basically a lower income deduction. Everybody gets their standard deduction from the tax code, but unlike the current tax system where your deduction zeroes you out, this can actually go into the negative, so the government can end up owing people money. And what it ends up doing is that your very lowest income tax bracket today would actually get more in income than they're making today. They would get a check from the government at the end of every year for about $3,000. Friedman did a lot of work in this, made a lot of arguments why he thought this was free market, why he thought this was something conservatives should support. I've got mixed feelings about it again because I don't like the idea of the government, people being reliant on the government, like the idea of the government leaving us alone. And speak actually to the bulk of the question too, I think, that you're bringing up. In Spain has a VAT tax, value-added tax. Each point of production, there is a 10%, in some cases, I'm not sure what the rate is in Spain, tax placed on that eventually just gets passed on, until it's all paid for at the final point of resale. VAT taxes are notoriously easy to increase. They're hidden in the price of the product. And even small increases can astronomically increase government revenue, thus growing the size of government. I think there is some fear in any type of national sales tax type idea of that happening, of Congress, just slightly tweaking tax a little bit, growing revenue, and a few years coming back, tweaking it again, and especially if it's tax inclusive and not tax exclusive. So you don't see on the ticket here's the 7% sales tax you just paid. If it's inclusive, built into the price of the product, it's very hard to realize that price creep. And in Europe, this is a huge issue. European governments do that with the VAT. And even worse in Europe, and something that we need to make sure we do, if we adopt a fair tax model, we have to repeal the 16th Amendment. That amendment is still around that allows the federal government at any point to reinstitute the income tax. Europe, some European countries have an income tax, a heavily progressive income tax, for instance, France, and a VAT. And that is economically crushing. This is an issue that came up with during the 2012 presidential election with Herman Cain, his 999 plan. He had a 9% sales tax, 9% flat tax, and then 9% VAT, all included in the system. And the problem, we pointed out at ATR, is that this allows for a lot of tax creep. And eventually this 999 plan will become an 11-11-11 plan. And it'll become a 15-15-15 plan. And And you get a Democrat, president, a Democrat Congress, and you're looking at a 20-20-20 plan. And that's something that I think we gotta be very wary of. Flat taxes are a little bit easier to defend. Massachusetts is a flat tax, 5.3% flat income tax. Massachusetts, one of the most liberal states in the country. There have been the Democrats, while having the governorship and both state houses have tried to push bills to increase that flat tax. They have failed. They tried to put it on the ballot. They failed. People know what they're getting, know what they're paying. They know they're paying that 5.3%. And immediately, yes, you try to increase that, the people know. Because they either introduce legislation or you have to sit there and put it on the ballot. They go to the ballot box and say, wait a minute, you want to increase the income tax rate from 5.3 to 7%? What? No. Vote no. With inclusive tax plans on a retail sales tax, be very careful with the price agreement, especially if legally Congress can do that without necessarily passing a bill. One last issue is with collection. And I know a lot of this is pushed to the state level. States do a lot of collecting. There are also a lot of states that don't have sales tax. Delaware doesn't have a sales tax. I think there's a bit of a federalism issue there, with then the feds forcing Delaware to create some regime to collect the sales tax for them. And I don't think the Delaware state government would want to take on that burden of collecting the sales tax. So that's just one issue I do find.
Thank you. Before going on to the next question, I want to come back to this because there's a lot of people who are against a fair tax for one of the reasons that Will stated, that one of the selling points for the fair tax, I think it's a wonderful selling point, is that you can see right there, this is how much you're paying. However, it could be used as the back door for a VAT in the United States. So in other words, that it could be utilized to impose a new tax that doesn't exist today and make matters actually worse instead of better, because this new fair tax would be imposed at different points of production and become hidden, and actually more hidden than it is today. What do you say about that, Steve?
Good point, and we spend a lot of money looking at that.
Okay.
It's a very real issue, and is one reason why we are one rate, retail sales only, no retaxing of used goods and services. It's very clear. The line in the sand is the retail sales purchase. We don't tax businesses. We don't tax corporations. We don't tax anybody other than the final retail purchaser. Did you hear me okay? Okay. And as you say, it shows up on the sales receipt, right there. The gallon of milk that used to be $2 is now $1.60. We add about 45 cents of tax on it, so it's now about $2.05. You see that on your receipt. That is also addressing your question a little preemptively. How are we going to keep it from creeping up? The answer is, we will get the government we deserve. We are the people who are going to tell Congress, no, you are not going to increase the rate. We are the same people who are going to tell Congress, you are not going to cut an exemption for this company while putting a new tax on this company. The fair tax, as our Constitution, is only as good as the people who are willing to defend it. You've all heard our Constitution is only for a moral and upright people. The fair tax is only for a country that is willing to control its government rather than be controlled by its government. So it will be up to us to make sure the fair tax stays fair and at the point that it is set. There was another piece to that.
There was, but let me go back to the person who asked the question. We tried to discuss both the regressivity, where it's such a huge amount of tax, as well as the controls. Did we satisfy?
No.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why.
Okay.
It sounds like Obamacare to me. I mean, it sounds like what we're talking about is, we will not, you can use your own doctors. you can do this, and you can do that. And today, these poor people out there are trying to spend more money than they have to spend, and they'll go do without insurance. And what happens, if this fair tax works, and it's not controlled,
Right.
then people not believe.
Well, I'll take a stab at that and just say, and if you guys disagree, either of you disagree with me, then we'll move on to another question, is that there's an issue just inherent in our system today, whether we keep our current system, or we move more flat, or we move to a fair tax, and just control. An informed electorate who are keeping their elected officials in check. And it seems to me that regardless of what system we choose to incorporate or move towards, that we're going to continue to struggle with that issue as a society until and unless we as an informed electorate start to exact some control on our elected officials. Would either of you care to?
Let me expand that just a little bit. Whether you have a flat tax or a fair tax, if we allow them, Congress will put in a VAT tax.
Sure.
They will put in a financial transaction tax. There are already proposals to do that.
They're going to.
Yeah. So it is going to be up to us. One reason I talk about 218, 60, and 1, we are in danger with people that are in Congress right now.
Amen.
If we do not put people in there who reflect the values that make America great, we're in trouble.
That's true.
And it's going to take 218, 60, and 1. You may think we need a supermajority, and that would certainly be nice. It would certainly make it easier. But every piece of legislation takes 218 to pass. That's a majority in the House, 60 in the Senate, and it takes a president willing to sign it. He doesn't have to like it, but he's got to know that the American people are not going to stand by and let him not sign it.
Well, you know, the thing is, he said, I'm going to raise the minimum wage regardless of what Congress says.
So yeah, control is what control is, and having checks and balances. Do you care anything to add to that before we move on to our next question?
Yeah, I think, just the big thing in why I lean towards more of a flat tax versus a fair tax is the idea of control. It's a little bit easier, I think, to control, especially a shift to the VAT system, because again, they're going to have to upend the current tax system, the way things are done. Even though we're making it simpler and a lot more efficient, they're going to have to upend that and switch to a whole new system. The fair tax gets us halfway to a VAT. And that worries me. I think that's concerning. And I think, it would be nice if the American public was well informed and were, voted for the right people every time. But we're also talking about a voting population that re-elected Barack Obama. They voted twice for Barack Obama. He maintains a 42% approval rating despite how awful Obamacare rollout has been. People getting kicked off their insurance. He's still at 42% approval rating. I think fundamentally there are things we have to consider about the American public and where we're at, and the fear that yes, eventually, they could take a fair tax and turn it into a VAT, and I think Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid want to do that.
I'll respectfully ask if we could take somebody else's question, but do you have some?
But I just want to tell you, I do thank you for addressing it, and
Thank you for the question.
It's something I've tried to let you know.
It's difficult. Next question. Yes, sir.
First off, a gallon of Smith milk at IGA Crooksville today is $3.99.
You guys are expensive over here.
Yeah, I know. And but that's shit. My property taxes have gone through. I bought 36 acres out there in Roseville, and first taxes I pay like $75 a year, and they've gone up and up and up. Not that much improvement, shack. But they say the property's worth more, and everything. So it's gone, like the last few years, it's gone from 900 an acre, which is something pretty cool, to 1,500 an acre. And then 2 years later, it goes 1,500, but last year it went to 2,500 an acre. And I call them up, they tell me, well, everybody gets straight across the board 2,500 an acre. And even though there's no more levies that are passed on the property taxes, they double their income.
I'd like to stay focused on fair tax, flat tax, but it's yet another tax. So in light of fair tax, flat tax, since it is a state issue, I'll start with you, Will. How would either of these proposals on a federal level or state level, fair tax or flat tax, impact the need for the use of property tax? Because that's a huge issue, and Ohio has one of the most oppressive ones in the country. So let's talk about that.
$1,000 a year now.
Yeah, at the state level, you're looking at, especially Ohio, one of the most convoluted, most complex tax systems in the country. You've got 9 income tax brackets. You have a massive property tax regime that's county-based, where they can assess, and no assessment caps. The key is assessment caps. You can get there, flat tax. Kansas actually is looking at some property tax reform. We just did it in Iowa. We actually put caps on assessment that can't assess over 3%. They're going to use income tax revenue as part of that. Part of it's a balancing scheme. The idea in some states, in Wisconsin, is they'll be relying on sales tax and property tax. You'll pay a little bit more in sales, probably a little bit more in property, but you won't have any income tax. With the end goal, though, also cutting income tax to zero, which would still cost the state revenue and still reduce the size of the state. Ohio, we had a very good opportunity to start addressing property taxes and municipal income taxes. Muni tax reform, House Bill 5, special interest groups in Columbus gutted it, killed it. It's a shell of what it was. There were 900 different income tax jurisdictions in the state of Ohio dealing with local income taxes. This bill would have addressed that, consolidated, make it actually make sense. We're not going to get that now. Part of that, I don't mean to be too critical of Governor Kasich, but there are some issues there, even with his current tax plan he's proposed now, and then with the state income tax, there's tax shifting. He's not reducing the size and scope of government. Once you add in the new tax increases that he's putting in it on fracking, on tobacco products, on vapor, he's increasing the CAT tax, the commercial activities tax, the gross receipts tax. You end up with about a $174 million tax cut over 3 years. Scott Walker just cut taxes by $500 million over 2. A little bit bigger tax increase. Governor Brown back to $800 million over 2.
But the headline is that, but we're decreasing your income tax.
Yes, we're decreasing your income tax, but we're jacking up taxes across the board.
So just to keep things moving, let's talk about this in terms, because under a fair tax, the states will take the lead role in collecting revenue. What's to keep the fair tax from just being yet another mechanism to hide what's really happening, like what's going on in Ohio right now, where Kasich is touting, reduction in state income tax, but all this other monkey business is going on? Wouldn't the imposition of the fair tax, with the states taking the lead, allow for even more monkey business to take place?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
And here's why. One, all of a sudden the income tax disappears. And people know what they're actually paying. They know what the cost of government is. And let's follow the assumption that Ohio does away with its income tax and goes to a sales tax as well. So now we have, every time you make a purchase, a clear delineation of what government is costing you in terms of the federal government and in terms of the state government. When people are aware of what's going on, they become more involved. When you see 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% of your disposable income going to taxes, you get excited and you take action. So, again, going back to a thought I articulated earlier, we will get what we allow ourselves to be railroaded into. If we allow Columbus to add additional taxes, they will. If we don't, then they won't. And I'd like to clear up one thing that was brought up earlier and I didn't have a chance. The fair tax is about one thing and one thing only: how we collect the necessary revenue for government. We will bring in the same amount of money as the current system. We will just do it in a more efficient, a more fair manner. We are not fighting the battle over how much or how little we spend, because we all have different ideas on how government should spend money. The fair tax is very focused. It's designed to do one thing, and that is make the system of revenue collection better. So, and I'm not trying to sidestep the issue. I'm simply saying We're focused on doing the best we can on this issue. And we'll go fight the other ones in a different battle. But let's focus on the fact that our current system is horrible. It allows for government to trample our individual rights. And it is undercutting the future of our children. So we're focused on fixing that, and fixing that first. And then we're going to fight these other battles, because they're battles that are very worthy. And I'm not dismissive of what Will was saying at all. I may sign up when we're done. But the fact of the matter is, I believe we have to deal with this one issue first. And a little bit along those lines, going back to something that was said, Will's concerned about the fair tax creating a mechanism for the imposition of a VAT tax. I look upon it totally differently. We are eliminating the mechanism that would be used to impose that VAT tax by getting rid of the IRS. Columbus is not going to impose a national VAT tax. Kentucky's not, Texas not. There's only one entity that can put a VAT tax into play, and that's Washington. And if we cut the legs out from under the IRS, if we remove the enforcement arm for the Washington elitists who think that we come second, then we have dealt, hopefully, a mortal blow to this idea of the VAT tax, the financial transaction tax. The whole plethora of taxes that, as you say, they try to impose on us in the shell game. Oh, I'm going to reduce this while they're actually raising this. So we want to put an end to that. We want to cut their throat, so to speak.
Thank you for that, Steve. Next question we have up front. Yes, sir. All right, we'll both of you.
I'll go.
You want to go first?
One then the other right here, and then we'll go around. Yes.
Well,
Would you care to take this? Up to you.
They can't hear you.
And then just hold it down because it will give you some feedback. You just hold it to your chest and you'll be just fine.
Okay. Well, I was concerned about the discussion about prebates and why do we need a prebate if it's not welfare? If you don't make the money, then you're not going to spend it. So you're not going to pay the tax, but and then on the income side, you have a standard deduction. Would that still be under the flat tax, a level at which you didn't pay anything until you made that much money?
It depends upon the proposal. There's several flat tax proposals. Hall-Rabushka does not have one. Friedman's negative income tax does. Almost every single state of the 7 states that have it, and including soon-to-be North Carolina, that'll have a flat tax. They all have a standard state deduction. No one's done it without that yet. I'm not aware what it's like in some of the Eastern European countries that have implemented the flat tax. I don't know if they have a standard deduction or not. I know Estonia does, but it's the only one I know.
That's a great question. If we care to, and this will help you out, maybe we can go into a little bit more detail into the mechanics of how a prebate would work and not reward people with sloth. Not reward
Yes,
people.
because they might be collecting the prebate and going out and spending for things they didn't really need. And how would you determine who is at the poverty level? You know, there's not supposed to be any, where you have to fill out any tax, like you do with the income tax. How would you determine?
Well, I know there's a
who
very
gets
specific
it?
proposal, so let's let Steve answer the very specific. Thank you for the question. Specifically, how would the prebate physically be implemented, and how would it physically work? What would I, as a person who, say, is making minimum wage, have to do? What would I experience?
Okay. The answer is, we don't care how much you earn. I don't care whether you're poor or you're rich. I'm not going to tax you on any of your purchases up to the poverty level. And quite honestly, it's your money. If you go out and blow it on red sports car, brand new red sports car, that's your decision. I am not. And I don't believe the federal government should be telling you how to spend your money.
I agree.
Okay? It's your money. Now,
If everybody gets freedom, that's under the poverty level, how do you know who that is?
it's everybody. Everybody spends at least up to the poverty level.
Everybody gets freedom.
Sure. There's nobody in this country who actually lives below the poverty level because we have a social safety net. And again, I'm not fighting the battle of whether we give people too much in welfare or not. But the fact of the matter is, nobody lives below the poverty level because they get aid to dependent children, they get food stamps, they get a variety of services. If you look, and they've done studies on it recently, a person who takes full advantage of our social welfare network gets the equivalent of over $60,000 in services. Okay, so they're not living on $11,000 a year. Okay, they've got money, they're spending. They're buying flat screen TVs, cell phones, they're getting their nails done and tattoos under the current system. What we're doing under the fair tax is we're saying nobody is going to be taxed below the poverty level. You get the money back. I'm not going to tell you how to spend that money.
So from a practical perspective, every citizen in the state of Ohio will register something. We'll say a social security number with a state taxing authority so they know where you live. They know that you are a single person above the age of 18 and thus should be working. But it doesn't matter if you do, because what you will do is you will get a check each month, assuming that obviously you're living, so you're buying some food, you have a place to live. If you're working, you have transportation needs. So the assumption is that if you are above the age of 18 in the state of Ohio, you will be registering with the state of Ohio, some taxing authority, and you will get a check at your home each month of the amount that would be the poverty level divided by 12 as a monthly installment for your prebate. Is that how that would work?
Let me give you a couple examples.
Okay.
Okay, my wife and I live together. She allows me to stay there occasionally. So that's 2 adults. So we would submit our registration card, our notice of residence, and every month we would get the prebate refund, which for 2 adults would be $226 a piece, so about $250. My son, who lives over in Indiana, he has a wife and a brand new grandchild, well, we have a grandchild, he has a son. He would register as head of household, 2 adults, 1 child. So his prebate would be about $620 a month. And that would compensate him, as it would us, for our purchases up to the poverty level, the taxes we pay. And that's it. Nobody checks to see how much I earn, how much he earns. Nobody checks to see how much my wife earns. It's none of the government's business how much we earn. In fact, it's really none of their business how much we spend, except insofar as we need to contribute on our purchases above the poverty level once we've taken care of ourselves. We need to help fund government.
And that's very helpful. I think that takes a lot of the mystery behind it. I'd like to give Will an opportunity to speak on it. If there's anything you care to add. Are any concerns with that mechanism? I know you briefly spoke to in your opening remarks with regards to some of those, but anything you care to add that you haven't already spoken to?
Yeah, a couple quick things involving the rebate, and I think one concerning issue again is with it being viewed as more of a welfare tool than a actual tax refund, which I agree it is an actual tax refund, but it's the idea of perception. Another big problem I see with the fair tax is that it doesn't reduce the size of government. It keeps the current revenue at the current level. So you're not getting rid of the welfare state. You're not reducing the power and scope of the EPA. When you want to talk about building in price increases into products, the Environmental Protection Agency is one of the biggest enemies of consumers in America. One of the biggest enemies of anybody that tries to heat their home, flips on a light switch. Their enemy is the EPA. It doesn't do anything to force the government to rein them in and restrict them.
Well, in all fairness, does a flat tax rein any of that in either?
Depends on what you set the rate. If you set the rate at about 15%, what it would decrease government revenues.
Well, that would be true for either a flat tax or a fair tax. If you set the rate at
Right.
such that you starve the beast, you're going to necessarily have to reduce the size of government in either mechanism. Would that not be true?
But that's the goal. That's the goal of Americans for tax reform is to lower rates and consolidate rates in order to force the government to rein itself in. Because without doing that, the federal government isn't going to rein itself in. Because you have Congress, you have the president, then you have the federal bureaucracy, which outnumbers them all. It's very well ingrained. And the idea that even with a fair tax, the IRS will go away. The federal government, out of the blue, created something called the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. It regulates banks. Its former head, they attempted to put in as its former head Elizabeth Warren, who is now a United States Senator from Massachusetts, who hates banks. She wants to get rid of banks. She wants to basically nationalize banks. The federal government created that out of the blue. So even if the IRS temporarily goes away, the bureaucracy can rein it back in, or it'll just get folded in. You get a Democrat president with a Democrat Congress, and they will recreate the IRS and then put it in a bag. It's my theory is that we need not just switching the way we collect taxes, we need a plan to actually use taxes, and reducing taxes is a way to reduce the size and scope of the federal government.
Sounds like we have a recurring theme with regards to, regardless of what scheme we use, we've got a lot of work ahead of us. Another question, yes, sir.
I hear,
Yep.
like mobsters, our congressmen extort campaign contributions from businesses every 1 or 2 years in return for reauthorization of tax breaks not made permanent. Such tax extenders expire every 1 or 2 years to allow frequent extortion. The lucrativeness of this extortion racket has caused tax extenders to bloom from 42 in 1998 to 154 in 2011. Will a fair tax or flat tax eliminate this extortion racket so that businesses can plan long term?
We'll start with you on that.
Yeah, flat tax does. It eliminates all credits and deductions under some plans. Some plans will give you a standard deduction on your income tax, and that's all you get. All credits and deductions of the business take film credits, for instance. The film industry has lobbied very hard for film credits. So certain states will get, people shoot movies there so you can make a little bit of money off of it. That's the expensive people living in that state, honestly. All those go away. We eliminated all those. It's something we've been looking at in Oklahoma and we've done in Kansas. We started the rollback. Kansas actually lowered its standard deduction and cut it nearly in half in order to lower the overall income tax rates. So yeah, you don't get as much as your standard deduction, but you're also paying a heck of a lot less in income taxes. Flat tax, all the extenders, gone. Pay one rate. That's it. You can file your taxes in the back of a postcard.
What's the danger, however, of saying, because there is a specific fair tax proposal, and to Steve's credit, you've got something very specific that has been outlined to the nth degree that you have to defend. A flat tax is a philosophy, a theory, and there's many different mechanisms in which a flat tax can be imposed. So what's to keep there from being, and then I'll let Steve answer the exact same question here in a moment, what's there to keep from saying, yes, we have a flat tax, but we're going to carve out this exception for this person. It's a flat tax. Don't get me wrong, it's a flat tax. But this industry gets this credit, or this type of person, or people who buy this type of green vehicle, or this get some sort of incentives, but they will label it a flat tax.
Yeah.
Well, what kind of protections are, to this gentleman's question, that you can keep that from happening?
It's the same issue with the fair tax and rate creep. You have to have citizenry that doesn't want those extenders put in there, that don't want those exemptions, that don't want the carve outs for different companies, that don't want the carve outs for this group or that group. I think with a flat tax, it's a little bit easier to prevent the actual rate from creeping up. The deductions, again, that's a hard thing. That's about electing members of Congress that won't sit there and do political favors. And I think we're getting a little bit better at electing some of those people, finally. But that's really what it does come down to. And it's for both sides. You prevent those exemptions. You need members of Congress to say no.
Exemptions, extensions, extenders, subsidies.
Lions and tigers and bears, oh my.
Exactly. Can you talk to that with regards to the fair tax?
Yeah. One of the reasons the extortion racket is still effective is because we have an income tax. And they sell manipulation of that income tax. Under the fair tax, corporations are not taxed. Companies are not taxed. S corps are not taxed. So there is nothing to manipulate. If there's nothing to manipulate, Congress loses the power to change or to affect those companies. If congressmen can't do anything to help or hurt, then lobbyists have no reason to give them money. So the fair tax, by virtue of destroying the mechanism that they use, eliminating the root cause of how they do it, eliminates that opportunity for lobbyists to buy favors through manipulation of the tax code. And I'd like to bring up one other point that you didn't really address, but it falls in line with it, and you kind of touched on it. Congress actually works two ways. They can hurt you or they can help you. For instance, Solyndra, green energy. Congress can take money, take your money, and give it to somebody to help them. Now, neither the flat tax nor the fair tax affects that. What the fair tax does is we focus, again, very tightly on eliminating those aspects of the tax code that give Congress so much power and the ability to extort so much from average Americans. So when I say we eliminate the effect of lobbyists on Congress, we do, but only on the taxing side. There's still got this other side that we're going to have to address after we've addressed the tax issue.
You can still give stuff away with the revenue you get, even if you've collected it more fairly, correct?
They can,
Yeah.
but now it becomes more visible and easier for us to start going after.
Very good. Yes, sir.
My question relates to, back a little more fundamental maybe than this. Now, what are you saying?
Yeah, go up so
Oh,
Make it a little bit easier.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So right now, the welfare and the food stamp system gives the liberal side a big, big voting block when it comes to electing officials and so on. Now, would either tax system make elections fundamentally more fair and honest? And but this all seems to really emphasize really the kind of people that we elect into positions. And I think right now, you know, we could say Obama's this, Obama's that, Congress is. Really, it's we who fundamentally are the only ones who can make a difference.
So we've got people selling their votes basically for goodies. Anything that the fair tax team, will start with you, that helps with.
Yeah, but let me say one other thing first. We screwed up. Our generation let this happen. You know, some of you younger folks out there are suffering the consequences of what we in the 60s and the 70s let happen. So we have a responsibility to fix it, if you come right down to it. This is our legacy for the following generations, whether they end up with the kind of country that we had the opportunity to keep and let slip out of our hands. So we have a challenge, and part of that challenge is dealing with the issue of the poverty. The answer to poverty is quite simple. People working. If you have somebody who is working, they have only a 5% chance of living in poverty. if you're not living in poverty, you're much less susceptible to manipulation by corrupt politicians offering you things that you could earn on your own. Particularly when you see that by offering you those things, they're going to be increasing your tax rate. The fair tax creates 10 million new jobs. That's 10 million people that will be moving out of poverty and into what I would hope would be a more conservative worldview and a more conservative requirement on government to continue to support Americans as opposed to taxing Americans. So the answer to your question is, the fair tax does address the issue, but it does it indirectly. Not by telling people what to do, but by creating an environment where we all have the opportunity to do what everybody wants to do, be successful, to be responsible, to live on our own, as opposed to being a ward of the state. So the fair tax creates the environment that lets that happen.
Will, is there anything inherent in flat tax regimes that would assist with this issue that the gentleman brought up?
Yeah, it's something that we focus on in Americans for tax reform and consolidating and reducing rates. If you reduce rates, it means less revenue for the government. It means they have to start looking at reforming, Medicare, Medicaid. One of the biggest things we can do right now is basically put the pressure on the feds to block grant Medicaid to the states. Let the states figure out the best way to operate the Medicaid system, the best way to operate welfare, the best way to operate S-chip. Block granting welfare is I think what we need to do. The only way we're going to get there is to force the feds' hand. The way we do that is we start with these. We cut off the revenue from the federal government. One thing that really worries me about fair tax versus flat tax you pay one single rate. It's there, and there can be some trickery with the standard deduction under a negative income tax regime like Milton Friedman proposed. But anything that has a rebate or a deduction to it is immediately susceptible to political pressure. I'm skeptical of the number of jobs that fair tax can create. We modeled out the number of jobs our flat tax can create in Kansas using Beacon Hill data. They're the #1 economic modeling firm in the country. Beacon Hill didn't even get it right. At first we were exceeding the projections, now we're a little bit behind them, and it varies. Will it create 10 million jobs? I don't know. That's been implemented. You don't know for sure. It's all an economic model at this point. And economic models can be wrong. I mean, you can pay Beacon Hill to run a bunch of numbers and show you that communism works properly. It's in theory. You need to see it in practice. But so until then, I don't know how many people is going to live out of poverty. Now we start talking about the rebate. So let's say Congressman wants to get elected. Well, does anybody know how the poverty line was actually established? Established in 1960. It was a random calculation from Housing and Urban Development. And they said this is the poverty line. And they slapped it onto inflation. That's how the poverty line increases, by the rate of inflation, off of an arbitrary number from 1960. So a member of Congress said, hey, you know what, I'm facing a tough re-election. I've got a lot of people in my district that are right around that poverty line. Let's increase the poverty line. Let's change the system. Let's make it bigger so that rebate's bigger. More people are getting a bigger rebate now. They're going to vote for it. I worry about Congress starting to tweak with deductions and stuff on any system. And then you can still get pressure from corporations, from state and local governments. Something we haven't talked about is that state and local governments are subject to fair tax. That's going to increase their costs. They're going to be spending more if they consume things. Any purchase state and local government makes that consumes at retail is now subject to the fair tax. That drives up state and local government costs. That means they're going to have to increase local property taxes, local sales taxes, state income taxes in order to make up for that revenue. Unless we say no, then we can actually force them to maybe shrink a little bit. I would love to see that. More than likely, they're going to find ways to increase revenue to keep current spending where they're at. And we got Republican governors across the country who aren't decreasing spending, honestly. They're just kind of, some of them are holding the line. A few of them cut a little bit. You've got other governors. Chris Christie's increased spending. John Casey's increased spending. So automatically assume that it's going to happen. I don't see that. I think they will if you set the rate low enough, it'll force the feds to cut back and block grant. If you try to set the rate equivalent so we keep the current revenue where it's at, no, it's not going to do anything. Fair tax won't do anything either, which is why at ATR we believe in lower, flatter fare. We want to reduce the rates. If you reduce the rates, you starve the beast, and the government has to reform itself then. You force the federal bureaucracy to reform. Without that, we're still, on first base. We're not advancing the bases. We're not moving the ball down the field.
Yes, ma'am.
I think the biggest problem that we're looking at, and Paul kind of touched on that, was that we're looking back at 47% that was referred to in our last election. And these are the people who are getting entitlements. And I don't know how you're going to sell them on a fair tax when they're not working at this point. They certainly don't care whether there's payroll deductions. They're not having to pay them. And people who are on Social Security and are not working, they're certainly not going to want to go to the grocery store and have to pay a percentage on their food that they're not paying now. So I would say that's the thing up in my mind that right now I'm thinking, how are you going to squeak this by people that are going to send their legislators to Washington and pass this? We can talk about a lot of things, but the reality is we have uninformed voters who are out there and not working by choice. I don't think they're going to change that because they're going to be told that if the fair tax is passed, there's going to be more jobs and they're not going to have to pay taxes if they can get ahead. Because let's face it, a lot of these people do not have incentive. They don't want to get out of that poverty hole. They have an entitlement attitude. They want government to give them everything.
I think we've talked about the entitlement aspect of it, but I love the part of your question that deals with the optics of a 20% sales tax and how can you, how you had stated some statistics with regards to those who ran on a fair tax platform fared very well in the 2000, I believe it was 2010 elections that you were referencing. But when push comes to shove at a federal level and the liberal media machine starts cranking out advertising saying that if you vote for these people, if you enact a fair tax, you're going to see your your food bill go up by 20%. How do you fight those optics associated with these people who are low information voters who immediately are going to be susceptible to a message from the left that point blank says you're going to have to pay 20% more for your goods and services? So let's just talk about this, not necessarily the merits of fair and flat tax, but the optics of fair and flat tax, if we can for a moment. Selling that to a low information, entitlement-minded voter. So let's start with you, Steve, on that.
Okay. It's not an easy thing to do, but it can be done. And it depends a little bit on which particular demographic you're addressing. If we're taking somebody who is a lifelong moocher, they've lived off the system forever, what I'm going to tell them is, you realize they're stealing 20% of everything you get with hidden taxes right now, using the IRS to take it out of your pocket. Under the fair tax, what we're going to do is we're going to give you a couple $100 a month. Every month you're going to see that, and that's going to compensate you, give you back the money that they're keeping right now. And when those guys tell you it's going to go up 20%, what they're not telling you is the prices are going to go down before the tax goes on. So one thing you need to think about as a voter is, if they're going to lie to you about the fair tax, what are they going to do to you once they get into Washington? So you as an individual, we'll call it Mr. Moocher, needs to recognize you're being taken right now. And what we're doing is offering you an opportunity to get out from under their thumb. Because the fact of the matter is, they're using you to keep themselves in power.
But getting a pre-baked check is definitely a good sales mechanism, Will. So you obviously are going to have one side that's going to say, you're being taxed 20% more, but by the way, you're also getting this actual check in your hands each month. Compare and contrast that, if you will, and the pros and cons of the optics, again, just the selling aspect of a fair tax versus a flat tax.
Can I don't want to interrupt, but
Sure.
you did exactly what we've got to keep people from doing. You said it's going to go up 20%. It's not.
Yeah, that's how it's going to be sold. How you're right, but that's how it's going to be sold.
And that is how we're going to, that is the trap we're going to set for the person that tries to tell them that. They're lying to you, and we can show you, and if they're lying to you now, what are they going to do to you when they're not standing in front of you?
Good.
I apologize.
No, good. Good caveat. Go ahead.
Couple things to that. One, the 47% number, actually that's looking at about 7% that's veterans. A lot of them get certain benefits and rebates and stuff. When you actually break down Social Security, veterans, and good people out of it, you're looking at about 30% of the population that's on the welfare state. We had to deal with this in Kansas. Kansas, we're eliminating state income tax. Left really came out of the woodwork. We got the guy named Cole Davis running for governor right now against Sam Brown back, who is a huge tax expense liberal. Sits there and basically said, look, they're going to take everything away from you. The sky is falling. Governor Brownback came out and did something very important, and he did town hall. He spoke to the people, spoke to these people, went and met with them, and explained, listen, by basically consolidating the rates and trimming the rates, what we're going to do is create opportunities in Kansas. Not all these people, there's definitely a large percentage that want to live off the welfare state. There's another percentage of people that would like to go back to work. They worked for years and years, and the economy got hit pretty hard yet. They want to go back to work. The way you do that is you create a tax system that incentivizes job creation, that incentivizes companies moving into your state. Federal level, the only way we're going to be able to do that is, again, cutting off revenue and forcing credit to block. Right? On the state level, we can start laying groundwork here. And that's through tax competition in the states, and we're seeing that. Kansas is proving that the tax system in Missouri and Illinois is terrible. And people are moving, people are leaving. People are leaving Missouri, leaving Illinois, and it's not just people with jobs currently. There are people who have been unemployed in Missouri who are now finding jobs and getting work in Kansas. And I think that's an area. It's an idea. It's a positive narrative. It's an idea of hope. If we move towards a flat tax system, a very simple tax code, businesses will locate in the United States because they have certainty. They have long-term certainty, and they will create jobs. There will be more jobs. People will be able to work. Those who want to work. Those who don't. And guess what? We're going to be ratcheting down the rates a little bit. And the government's going to have to straighten the size, and that's just the way it is. And that's really what you sell. If you guys stay positive about it, I don't think saying, listen, there's these rebate checks, or this, that's the way to do it. I think being a little tough at times is necessary. And we've got guys that we run the taxpayer protection pledge. It's literally a pledge we have legislators sign to their constituents and say, I so and so promise the people of X state that I will oppose any and all efforts to increase taxes. Stanford University did a study on our pledge. They found that people who sign the pledge are more likely to get elected. People who break the pledge are more likely to get defeated. Even people who disagree with the pledge and ATR's mission, if their legislator breaks the pledge, they are even more likely to vote against the person they view as a liar. And the liberals argue the pledge is one of the greatest obstacles to expanding or helping welfare, and the pledge is anti-war, the pledge ships jobs overseas, all kinds of stuff they come at us. We have almost every single member of the House, all but 3, and we've all got 3 Republican U.S. senators. We have 95% of congressional Republicans, over 1,200 state legislators across the country. Of the 24 governors, we've got 19 of them who signed the pledge. It's just a certain population does want welfare, and they're going to vote that way. But a large chunk of them will vote the right way, meaning they do want work. And I think that the success of the taxpayer protection pledge shows that.
Wait, here, Greg has one.
Yeah, we got a new question. We'll come back to you if we need to. Somebody hasn't asked a question. Yeah, Greg.
Yeah, we're talking about a round robin. We keep on going back to how corrupt the government is and they're spending the money. And if we don't, as a people, don't get rid of them, throw the bums out that are doing it, fair tax and flat tax won't even happen, so it's a moot point. So, but if we are successful in getting these guys out and getting better people in, and they do pass a fair tax or flat tax, we've solved part of the problem of the corruption already. And they know that we have the muscle to do it. That's what the Tea Party's all about, is because it isn't Democrats, it isn't Republicans, it's both sides that are doing this. They're all corrupt. And so that being said, we mentioned that we have 78 House members. Do we have anybody on the Senate? How about with the flat tax? Do we have any co-sponsors there for all the various bills? I wish they did have a flat tax with just one flat tax.
The Camp bill gets towards a flat tax. Dave Camp introduced tax reform. ATR took some issue with it. We have some problems with it. We also think there's very good things in it. We don't think there's one silver bullet tax reform. We want to see a couple proposals, get an idea of how we address not just personal income, corporate income taxes. Are we going to set the rates the same? We think a lot of this needs to be worked out and modeled out. The Camp bill has got a lot of co-sponsors on it. It's tragically, even if they pass it out of the House, it'll die in the Senate because of Harry Reid. We talk about the greatest threat to America. It's Senator Harry Reid. He runs around and calls the Koch brothers un-American and things like that. No, it's Harry Reid. Harry Reid has killed bill after bill after bill that would put more Americans to work. They're going to reduce their tax burden. They're going to reform the welfare state. It is Harry Reid. The most important thing we can do right now is we take the United States Senate and get rid of Harry Reid.
Well, you talk about the Camp bill, and is there actually a physical bill, or is there's just these statements of principle that have been
Camp has a proposal. It's in legislative form.
It was just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, there's a, it's not really legislative form, I misspoke. It's kind of a legislative framework. We're not there, and Camp realizes we're not there yet.
Right.
To get something really moving, it's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take, they want to see what we get in the Senate, where we're at in the Senate, to enact real tax reform. The fact is, there's a couple senators out there, one from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, and a few others, who aren't all that conservative and are prone to really, laying a hand at special interests every now and then. And I think having an idea of where we're at in the Senate, if we're a one-seat majority or if we're a five-seat majority, will really impact what kind of proposal we can get out of the House and what we think we can get to the Senate and on President Barack Obama's desk for him to veto. It'd be nice if we could have supermajorities in both houses to override the president's veto. But until we get a Republican in the White House, this is all kind of a bit of an academic exercise in trying to figure out just how far we can push this without having people be like, whoa, you're moving too fast.
The last time there was a Republican in the White House and a Republican House and a Republican Senate, we did not reform the tax code, and we grew the size of the federal government astronomically. So, Steve, I'll ask you, at the very least, we have this Camp proposal, and even though there's not a lot of momentum, what little momentum there is seems to be around the flat tax angle. What can you speak to answer Craig's question here a little bit about what kind of momentum there may exist should we get the right people in the right seats of the bus for a fair tax at present?
Well, I said we've got 76 in the House, we've got 8, 9 in the Senate. Now, one of the problems with the Senate is, and actually in the House, Nancy Pelosi in the House, Harry Reid in the Senate, told any Democrat that if you even hint of support for the fair tax, you will be stripped of everything. So the battle lines of the fair tax are very well drawn at this point. The question of what flat tax proposal exists is still up for debate. Dave Camp has put together a framework, there's no question about that, but there is no bill in the House that I'm aware of right now that is a flat tax that actually has more than one or two, a handful of co-sponsors. So if you ask the question, which bill or which proposal has the most support, right now the fair tax has the most support.
But the leaders of the committees and a John Boehner, do you see that there's a chance in hell that he's going to allow a fair tax proposal to come to the floor before a flat tax?
Well, actually, we've been told, Dave Camp is chairman of Ways and Means, and we've been told that if his proposal goes down in flames, which it looks like it will, he is going to bring the fair tax up for a vote. Now, the odds are, given the particular makeup of Ways and Means, that it's iffy if it would pass, the fair tax will probably fail. But it will do something which is very important when you look at advancing it. It tells us exactly who is going to stand with us and who isn't. And that sets the stage for 2014 elections. And I'll be very honest with you. There's a lot of people that like the idea of a flat tax. Why? Because they can continue doing exactly what they're doing now. If not immediately, then the day after the flat tax is signed, whether it's Dave Camp's or somebody else's, the lobbyists will be in there saying, I'd really like a break for my constituent. I'd really like you to put up a new tax because my company's real big and we can afford to pay it. Our competitors are real small, it force them out of business. As long as the income tax exists, manipulation of it will be the biggest game in Washington. Did that answer your question sufficiently?
And Newport.
Okay, I have a question from Elizabeth, but I have something I'd like to say. I am tired of somebody taking my property. My property is my work. My property is whatever I get in income. My property is me. That's my home. That's my car. I'm tired of the government being in my pocket, always being in my pocket. What I'd like to think about the fair tax is something that we have to change a mindset. Well, you're poverty, you're poor, you're middle class, or you're rich. We're human beings in this country. We're Americans. So that person who's getting this rebate, which we'll all get, right? We will all get a rebate, puts us on the same evil playing ground, I think. We've got to get out of our heads that there's middle, underclass, poor, poverty, a middle class being destroyed, and the rich are getting richer. Because there's always changes in every one of those situations. So why can we not think along a straight continuum? We get a rebate, depending on how much you buy, and if I want to become more rich, I'll go out and buy Goodwill, or I'll go out and buy a secondhand car, because I won't pay it. But I get to make that decision. And also, I get to keep my money. You look at your taxes, just like Patrick was saying, your land taxes, they've gone up. Your telephone bill taxes have gone up. Some of those things, because they're a new service, will stay. Okay? But basically, I will have the ability to control my money, because I will have it all. Right?
There are aspects of fairness that are appealing to both proposals, but I'll start, Steve, with you, since I think Kay was talking specifically to the fairness aspect of the fair tax. I'm sure you would agree with her assessment.
I think she ought to be up here.
No.
No, you're absolutely right. The fact of the matter is, right now, we are being treated as subjects or serfs by the government, depending on how you want to look at it. We are used to create wealth that they then decide how it will be utilized. It's a very small group of people who seem to feel they're in control of the country, and you're working for them. And I find that personally repugnant and abhorrent. And that we as Americans really should not be allowing it to happen. And I'm going to drift a little bit. Let me take off my fair tax hat. But the fact of the matter is, we are supposed to give power to government to do the things that we want them to do. That doesn't exist anymore. Government has taken unto themselves powers we did not give them, and they are using those powers against us to force us to do what they want. We should be hiring government to perform necessary services. Government should not be using us to enrich themselves and to promote a particular ideology. One of the reasons I'm personally attracted to the fair tax is we begin this process of disempowering government, stripping away from them one piece at a time their ability to control us, and putting back in our hands the ability to control government. And I know I'm taking too long, but I really need to make this point. Think of the power it returns to we the people when our money flows from us to our state, the elected officials that are closest to us, and then to the federal government. They get the money after we decide they deserve it. If, to use Eric Holder as an example, he tells Ohio, you will put in new rules and regulations, under the fair tax, we look at him and say, yeah, and who's going to pay for it? We got the money, and you're not getting it until we get this resolved. The fair tax transfer could be considered the single greatest transfer of power from a central authority to back to the American people since the American Revolution. We took power from King George and put it in the hands of American patriots. The fair tax takes power from the Washington elite and begins the process. And I say only begins because Will is very right. There's a lot of stuff to do. Begins the process of returning the power to its rightful owners, we the people.
I agree with you 100%. I think the government, I don't want the government taxing my property, taking from me what I earn and what I make. Now, the issue from my end is both, one, the fact that there is going to be a federal government. Probably not going to be able to get rid of it. Would be kind of problematic. But the goal with flat tax and reducing rates as the way ATR wants to do, we want to reduce rates and consolidate rates and make the tax code simple. The goal there, no matter what plan you use, is to try to use that not only to create jobs, to grow the economy, but as a weapon against the federal government, cutting off revenue from the federal government. You're not going to get, the IRS is an awful institution. But I can tell you, I can name three right now that are a whole heck of a lot worse than even the IRS. The EPA, that is shutting down coal plants. The Department of Justice,
Yes.
controlled by Eric Holder, who I mean, look at this. You get issues going on with Benghazi, you've got issues going on with the IRS, all these problems, guess who prosecutes all those? The Department of Justice. Guess who's not prosecuting those? The Department of Justice. You're not going to rein them in. You're not going to rein the EPA. You're not going to rein in the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. It's regulating the crap out of banks, destroying the financial industry in the United States, and costing the United States GDP and jobs. You're not reining that in without cutting off the federal government revenue. And that's the goal with the flat tax, to create a rate that's low enough to force the federal government to rein itself in. Now, one other issue here to the fair tax, and this is again a concern, I want to see it implemented at the state level. It's got to be implemented somewhere first. I want to see what it really does. An actual fair tax, not what we have in Texas, where they're actually relying primarily on oil revenue. They have a margins tax, which is basically a dividends tax. Tennessee has a dividends tax. We're actually working with ATR right now to eliminate the dividends tax in the state. And we just actually fought the unions down there too, the Chattanooga plant to beat the UAW had all the access to the workers, and ATR and all the groups that were fighting this couldn't go in and talk to the workers. We won, despite that. But you've got these states, none of them have done a pure consumption-based tax yet. And that's it. They're relying on all kinds of other things. They Kansas to be the first. We get there. I'd like to see the fair tax guys, ATR and everybody else. And I've been working on trying to put a lot of effort into Kansas to see what we get. Because right now, as the Federation of Tax Administrators has actually pointed out that no state, no government entity in the United States has implemented a consumption tax that reaches the amount of goods that the fair tax would. We're not just talking about tangible goods, we're talking about intangible goods. You go to a lawyer, that's going to be taxed. You get on a bus, buy a bus ticket, that's going to be taxed. You're talking about a widespread, a very large, very broad base, which is good. Broadening the base good. I think a lot of services that aren't taxed right now should be taxed. You want to see people really get up in arms, though, walk into a town hall and tell people we should start taxing healthcare services. Get ugly. But you know, that's something we should be striving for. But until we see it in practice and how politically we're able to do it, I worry about it. You know, the idea of Obamacare, state exchanges, and Medicaid expansion is kind of a cool idea. You know, there's some interesting things that work and some things that definitely don't work. But on paper and in academics, it looked interesting. What we got was a bill that was written by a bunch of healthcare lobbyists, a bunch of healthcare consultants, and people that had skin in the game, and the unions who got themselves exempted from it. And we got this monstrosity that it doesn't even function. And I worry about the process and saying that, oh, we've got the silver bullet that's going to do it. Generally, 9 times out of 10, that's not true. It's just not going to happen. That's why there isn't one concrete flat tax proposal. We look at a broader sense of tax reform as a process, and it's a slow process. You're not going to eliminate the income tax in Ohio overnight. It's impossible. Economically, it's impossible. The distortions we create would wreck Ohio's economy. It's about a process of slowly reducing rates and trying to consolidate brackets. I would like to see brackets that are consolidated. We're not doing that yet. In Kansas, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Oklahoma, to some extent, I've got some issues that they're doing there. You're seeing that, but it's taking years. And ATR's position is by 2050, we think we can phase out the income tax in all 50 states. All 50 by 2050. We should be able to get there. The last ones will come around, like California, Illinois, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Maryland. But by then, their state populations will be like 2 or 3 people, so it shouldn't be too hard. But that's, I agree with you. I think there's a lot of issues that need to be worked out still, and it's going to be a process. And even more than the tax code itself, the biggest threat to freedom in America is the federal bureaucracy and where it stands. The EPA, the DOJ, the IRS, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. You've got the Department of Agriculture that tells farmers what crops they can and can't grow. That tells what pesticides they can use, what they can and can't do with this. Most of the welfare states actually run out of the Department of Agriculture. Everybody knew that. So they throw it all into the Ag bill or the Defense bill because people are less likely to vote against those. The Defense Department, NSA, you've got massive federal overreach, but it's bureaucratic, and we're not going to get there until we use the tax code to cut off revenue to the state.
I think it's a fair critique. I think it's a fair critique to say that the fair tax has not been implemented in any way, shape, or form on the scale or for the types of items to be taxed as is being proposed by the fair tax. However, what would you say to those folks who say, well, it can't be done at the state level to the degree that we could have the experiment because of the state boundaries issues? So in other words, if Ohio were to implement a fair tax, but Kentucky were not to, the chaos that would ensue associated with Ohio having this, relatively speaking, astronomical sales tax that doesn't exist in Kentucky would create an environment where you're really not testing the fair tax in the way in which it would be intended at the federal level. What would you say to those folks who say that it really can't be tested to satisfy skeptics such as yourself?
If you do it at the federal level, then you have an increase in prices in the United States. Again, there's a argument that the prices won't increase or could be taking out building prices. There's a lot of assumptions being made there, and this is academic. We don't know exactly how it'll work out yet for sure. It's based off of economic models. They're generally pretty right, but sometimes they can be really wrong too. If we have a 23% to 30% sales tax in the United States, the argument is that goods, what's stopping people from going to Canada then? It's going to be cheaper in Canada probably. So the argument is that the prices will actually drop. Then you get into the argument with the Federal Reserve then having to increase prices artificially through inflation because you're not having wages drop. This doesn't even address monetary policy. There's another whole aspect that has to come into this game to look at when you're dealing with tax policy.
We'll have an end the Fed forum next week. Next week we'll have an end the Fed forum.
The Fed, there's some things the Fed needs. It does need to be audited, there has to be oversight. Scared me a little bit. But there's an argument, and the other problem is that exports won't be subject to fair tax. So there's a thought that, well, prices will actually kind of level out and will be okay, will be competitive with the exports. So if I'm a Canadian company, I'm going to buy a bunch of American products and export them to Canada because I don't have to pay that 23% want to see how Kentucky and Ohio are running. I want to see how the United States, Canada, and Mexico are running. I think that's really considered.
Well, in an internet economy,
Yeah.
and we would create a whole new section of the code potentially associated with how to
Well,
handle.
imports would be taxed at 23%, right? They do a good job addressing imports. But, right now, that
Well,
would require internet sales tax.
imports would be taxed at 23% if you can find it.
Yeah.
So Steve, let me talk about what about the issue either with the state experimenting with it, and I know you're not advocating, you're talking about a federal level, but a state experimenting with it and creating chaos across the border between Ohio and Kentucky, or the United States experimenting with it and having some unintended consequences because it is just a model that would create some economic chaos because of people buying stuff overseas, attempting to import stuff, and then we're having to check stuff at the border and just creating that level of chaos. What would you say to that?
Wonderful. Okay, in one word. You've actually asked several questions, and
Fair enough.
I've got to kind of break them up into pieces. I think it could be implemented on the state level, and the reason is the mechanism is very simple. Assuming you already have a sales tax organization within the state, you simply broaden the base. Now, you can make the argument that people go across the border to the neighboring state. But you remember that $25 million we looked at, or that we spent in studies? We looked at how far people are willing to travel to save $1. Okay, if you're living in Columbus, you're not going to drive to Kentucky to buy milk. Okay, it's not that expensive. You're going to pay your stuff right here. Now, if you're living in Cincinnati and you can drive over the bridge, yeah, you might do a little bit of that. But how many people drive across town to fill up the gas tank? Not that many. Particularly if it's only a few pennies. Because remember, prices drop and you've got more money. So are you really going to drive 50, 60, 70, 80 miles to save 5% on a good or service? Addressing the issue of imports. Yeah, we tax imports. And guess what? You remember those jobs that got shipped overseas because Americans could not compete with imports? Those jobs are going to start coming back. And no, we don't tax exports. Guess what? That means American goods and services are going to be cheaper overseas. We're going to be exporting more. We're going to be expanding American factories. We're going to be adding American workers to create those products that we are now exporting, which because of our income tax system, we no longer export. I ran the numbers. 3.5 million jobs have been lost because of the income tax system. We would get a large number of those back. Not all of them, but a large number, 60, 70, 80%. We've lost 1.5 million jobs because of imports, cheap imports. How many people realize imports from another country have all of their taxes refunded to them when they export to our country under the VAT system, what they call border adjustment? So essentially, those goods are coming in tax-free. American manufacturers laboring under our system have 20% taxes built in. We have to be 20% more productive just to compete on a level playing field. 1.5 million jobs. You put the fair tax in, those jobs are going to start coming back. American manufacturers are going to be more competitive. We're already more productive. Now we get rid of the ball and chain that's the income tax code, and Americans start working again. And I'm sorry the gentleman left because that moves into something that was said earlier. How many people are willing to watch a child starve to death? Anybody? Okay. This is the problem with starving the beast. Every time you try and cut a government program, you are starving a child, you are letting a retiree eat dog food, you're denying vital medical care to somebody living at the poverty level. Under the fair tax, we take away that excuse by creating an economy, an environment, 10 million new jobs where people are working, where they can support themselves, where they don't have to depend on the government. We remove the need for the government so that we can cut the government. Now, I said I'm not here to argue whether government is too big or too small. What I'm simply pointing out is, with all due respect to Will, I don't think you're going to be able to make the argument of cutting government if it means starving children. On the other hand, if those kids are in a family that's earning a good wage because their manufacturing job has returned to America, then we don't need that program to support it. And cutting government becomes much simpler when the Democrats don't have the children to point to and say, he's starving, how can you cut? You had another question?
I think I may have covered it.
Okay.
Quickly, Will, you have something?
Yeah, quickly. 2 quick points. One, cutting government isn't how starving children. I encourage you all to go home, go to Senator Tom Coburn's website. He does great work on the amount of wasteful spending in government. It means apply some government jobs. Some bureaucrat over at HHS is going to get laid off. They're not going to cut programs. They're not going to drastically cut programs that leave starving children out.
When was the last time you saw anything in the mainstream media that supported anything you're saying? The mainstream media owns the narrative, and any cut that you're talking about is going to be exactly what Steve was saying. They're starving children.
We survived sequestration. We got some of the largest spending cuts in government history for sequestration, agreed to by President Barack Obama, even. We held him over the fire, made him do it. We've cut discretionary spending and defense spending. We've cut bloated budgets. And there's more ways that can be cut. Tom Coburn's highlighted and pointed it out. Now, and I agree, fair tax doesn't address the size and scope of government. Reducing it. Imports. Right now, imports in the United States aren't taxed later through the process. Under a fair tax system, anything bought over the internet from a foreign country, anything brought into the country that's going to be resold, needs to be purchased by a U.S. company and being brought in subject to 23% sales tax. How's that going to be assessed, and how are they going to make sure everybody's paying that? They're going to have a TSA agent check every single thing coming into the United States. You come in from a foreign country, from France, go through customs. 9 times out of 10, you don't get picked up in customs. I just got back from a trip to Iceland. First vacation I took in about 2 years. It's great. I didn't get hit going through customs. They didn't search my bag. The guy was really nice, smiled at me, and was like, all right, get on your way. Under this system, every single person that comes off that airplane is going to go through customs. They're going to see what you're bringing into the country and what you're bringing in and accuse you of reselling, even if you purchase it for yourself. Well, that's all still in the original packaging. Are you planning on reselling that to somebody as a product? Are you importing that product? That is a huge expansion of the power and scope of customs and border protection in the United States. Something I'm not comfortable with, and I don't want to see the government expand that. So I think in the end, children aren't going to starve because of the size of the government. If that's true, then what the heck are we doing? I don't want to see children starve. Why are we all out here advocating for limiting the size of government, for constitutional government? If that means children are going to starve, what the heck's wrong with this? That's just not true. Secondly, I think in the end, there's a lot of issues with the fair tax and the scope of government, and I'm afraid that it becomes a vehicle for an actual increase in the size of government. Because the new government agencies that will be needed to monitor the rebate, make sure to collect Social Security, or Social Security numbers, to make sure that's all being done. States can be corrupt too. I'm trusting the state government to do it. Just because it's closer to home doesn't mean it's less corrupt. We just had half of DC City Council go to prison. They're all in jail. There's not a whole lot left. It doesn't mean it's less corrupt. Doesn't mean it's going to cut out corruption. Doesn't mean it's going to simplify things necessarily. State government's completely efficient too. All I'd say is I think this is a process. I think the fair tax has a lot of merits. I think the flat tax has a lot of merits. I'm interested to see what happens. I want to see stuff tested out at the state level. I think now is the opportunity to do it. You've got 24 state governments under Republican control that lead congressional, including Ohio. And see Republican ideas get out there and how they impact economies, how they impact services, and how they impact the size and scope.
Can I clarify one thing?
You can quickly, and then I do want to get 2 more questions in before we finish up.
I'm not saying the flat tax would starve children. I'm saying you would be accused of starving children. I don't.
Fair tax. You're making poor people pay a 30% tax rate on anything they buy. So how can I buy food for my?
I just want to be clear. I was not accusing the flat tax.
That's the argument.
I want to be very clear on that. That was not my intention.
No, I think that's fair. Anybody has not asked a question, I want to make sure if someone has not asked a question and wants one that they can. Yes, sir.
I think it's pretty simple to say that flat tax, fair tax, anything's better than what we got. That's not the issue. The question I would have is, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around all of it. I see excellent points on both sides, and I understand why you both feel that tested out on the state level, that's the way our republic was designed to be. It was designed that the states would be the laboratories for freedom. But under both of your systems, I kind of get this idea in the back of my mind. Right now, the IRS and the tax code is used by the government to put a fist on us. Under fair tax, flat tax, either one, do you what would be the vehicle that you would envision that could reverse for the people to then put that fist over on an out-of-control government?
And I think you've already spoken somewhat, to that, but briefly, if you want to recap specifically to that point, as far as changing the power center.
Okay. Number one, we do away with the mechanism of the IRS. Right now, and forgive me for using the Nazi reference, the IRS is the American Gestapo. They have that kind of power when it comes to what they can do to individuals. And let me put in a plug. We have a movie coming out called Unfair. Should be out in the next few months. That chronicles what this out-of-control agency has done to our fellow Americans. It is frightening, horrifying what they can do if they decide they're going to destroy you. And that's up to including death. Now, how does it work? How do we take power away? Well, we destroy their ability and we move the control of the money closer to the people, which is the state. That's where our founders originally intended it to be, and I think they were a lot smarter than Barack Obama gives them credit for being. Did that answer your question?
Well, I guess I kind of left a little, it's more of a instant, if you will, retaliation for something that the federal government, the Congress and the President come out and they decide they want to do healthcare 2.0, and the people are up in arms and say, no. Oh yes, we're going to do all this, we're going to take funding and do this, and the people be able to say, you know what? No, you're not. I'm not going to purchase. I'm going to pull back my spending in the marketplace, like you said, for new items. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say, you know what? New car's going to wait. I'll buy a used, so I'm not feeding the beast. Kind of almost a system of a boycott. Would that be something that could happen in either one of these cases, to where the feedback from the populace on something could be almost instantly felt month to month, or going the money that's going from the state of Ohio to Washington, showing displeasure by and continuing to defund the beast?
Let me give a very short answer, and then I want to turn it over to Will because I don't want to monopolize. The answer is the people would work through their state government. We would march on Columbus. We would say, Governor Kasich, you will not send a penny to Washington until they pull back this horrible idea. if we're successful, then no money goes from Ohio. We wouldn't necessarily do it individually at our own personal purchasing level. Although we could, but it would be a longer dwell.
Well,
Under a flat tax system, everybody's paying one rate. The goal would be to find that sweet spot rate where the government doesn't have excess revenue to grow necessarily. So what would happen is, let's say you set the rate, a bunch of businesses move to America, so you give a much broader tax base, not a bigger tax base, more people are paying in. It actually kind of works like the income tax relief fund here in Ohio. You'd actually get the rates ratcheted down then. So you get a little bit more revenue. State says, all right, government says, all right, we're expecting to score much more revenue now over the next couple of years. So you bring the rate back down, trying to keep the government from increasing any revenue what they have. Now, so let's say when you do healthcare 2.0, they only have one source of income. Federal government has one source of revenue, and that's that flat tax. We've seen it in Massachusetts when they try to increase their flat tax. They don't even get close. Even in the legislature, Democrats won't do it. Real deep blue state Democrats won't increase the income tax. And they put up for a ballot, went down in flames. Washington State, another state, has no income tax. In fact, they have a two-thirds supermajority, which is something I think that we should adopt nationally to increase taxes. It takes two-thirds Congress. In Washington State, it takes two-thirds of the state legislature to increase taxes. So they can never get an income tax through the legislature. So they put it on the ballot. Bill Gates, 2012. Bill Gates' father backed to the tune of several $1 million a ballot initiative to put a income tax, progressive income tax, into place in Washington State. It barely got 30% of the vote. That's the key. If you do something like that, you put the feds in a position where they can't get more revenue. They have to live off what they get. Anytime they try to, they have to really make a case for the people.
but the dynamic's quite a bit different in all fairness,
Yeah.
Bill, is it? Because, I mean, you've got the balanced budget requirements at the state level where the feds,
The feds can deficit spend
Right.
to an extent, as long as people are willing to write the feds checks. They can float some treasury bills, they can float T-bills, Fed monetary policy to try to expand the monetary supply. So that's why the Fed remains somewhat independent from the federal government. That's why Treasury guards their T-bills very close, because people that think that China is the biggest investor in America, they own most debt. They in certain terms do, but it's actually the Fed. The Fed owns the most T-bills. That's how they increase the monetary supply. They have to be very careful, because that is a very dangerous game they play. If you run a calculation wrong and make the wrong move, trying to get a bunch of extra money from the federal government to do Obamacare 2.0, it'll tank the entire economy. The whole thing will go down the line. And you don't want that, because then you're talking either a really bad election year or an all-out revolution like we've seen in Egypt and some of these other countries. Like, you got to be careful. They're not going to do that. They're literally, as awful as Harry Reid and Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi are, they're not that stupid.
I think Janet Yellen may have more power than Barack Obama or
She might,
Boehner or Reid.
They try to interpret Fed policy now with the scarf she wears.
Two more questions. We'll have two repeaters up front because you guys have been chomping at the bit. And then, do we have a brand new? If there's one who hasn't asked a question, please, sir, go ahead.
All of you guys have been making reference to the federal government being willing to put themselves on a diet. It's like asking a heroin addict to cut down on his usage. How are we going to get a 5.3% flat tax? Or how are we going to get a governor in the state of Ohio to hold the money in Columbus when we've already voted on a constitutional amendment prohibiting health care, and we can't get him to abide by that? How do we make the thing work? I don't care which solution we go to, whether it's fair tax or flat tax, how do we make it happen?
So briefly, gentlemen, are we rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic to be having this discussion today? Will, we'll start with you.
Not rearranging deck chairs for the Titanic. It's more like we're out there on an iceberg ourselves, kind of pushing on the side of the Titanic, trying to get it to. It's going to be a long fight. It's going to be a really hard fight. Grover always preaches that one of the first steps, we think, there's no comprehensive plan we're going to be able to implement that's going to fix things tomorrow. It's just not there, and the ability to implement that plan is not there. One of the first steps we want to try to do is we can get control of the House, the Senate, and the presidency, implement the Ryan roadmap, implement the Ryan plan, start bringing in entitlements, block grant Medicaid, block grant Medicare, start devolving federal powers to the states again in terms of budget. Once we can do that, we can start chipping away. It's a slow process of chipping away. And that's how you have to do it. There is no silver bullet. There is no plan that'll get us there right away. I know it's kind of depressing to think about, but this is going to be a long fight. It's a long fight for the very soul of America. And right now it's 50-50. The Democrats are still somehow hanging on despite disastrous policy after disastrous policy. I mean, you want to see what a big comprehensive plan does. Look at the Great Society initiative of Lyndon Johnson. Look what it did to Southeastern Ohio. That was supposed to lift Appalachia out of poverty. It did jack. It did nothing. You got the EPA coming out with this comprehensive environmental energy plans and how they're going to regulate things. They're killing coal jobs. They're sending jobs out of the United States, and they're driving up energy prices. Yet the Democrats still, Obama still has 42% of the vote. It's going to be a long fight. Nothing's going to get done overnight. And that's what we say. 2050, we think we can get income taxes in the state level phased out. If it takes that long to get income taxes, it's going to take a lot longer to get the federal government where we need it, to a constitutional government. And it's going to take a long time because there's going to be a lot of resistance from you. You got to fight the federal bureaucracy. You got to fight the structure of Congress itself. You have to fight the White House at times because we're not always going to have a Republican president. We're not always going to have a Republican Congress. And you're going to have to fight a lot of state governments. Like fight California. You're going to fight Illinois. And the state governments don't want to see these changes because they expect the federal government to bail them out for their bad policies.
It took decades to get us here. Is it going to take decades to get us back? And is the fair tax too dramatic, too quickly, and thus doesn't have a chance of success because of it?
That's a good question. And my response is, I'm not sure we have decades. I'm not sure that our nation will survive as conceived for another 10, 20 years. The problem is, and Hayek spoke of it eloquently in his Road to Serfdom, the type of government we have now self-selects for the most ruthless, the most lawless individuals. And those people will not, once they reach a certain level of power, allow anybody to take that power away from us. Alinsky in his Rules for Radicals is very clear. Once you gain power, you shut off the mechanism that allows others to gain power. If we don't fix the problem pretty soon, I don't think there's going to be an opportunity to fix it. Now, you asked if there's a way to do it. And I think there is. I talked about it in 21860 and 1. We can't, as individuals, control what Washington does as a whole. What we can do is we can look at Pat Tebow, and we can run somebody against him, or we can tell him we're going to run somebody against him if he does not do what he's told. And if he fails, then we don't care whether he's a nice guy. We don't care whether he pets his dog when he walks in the door at night. I don't care how much he's fighting for. I'm not here to hear his stories. I'm here to get something done. If you don't pass the fair tax, then I'll find somebody who will. Okay? That wasn't always the attitude of the fair tax. I don't believe we have the time to be nice guys anymore. We have to get this done, and we have to get it done district by district. We have to replace those who oppose us. We have to either convince or intimidate those that are on the fence, and we have to support those that are willing to pass the fair tax. And again, I don't think we can appeal to the better nature of politicians. I'm not sure they have one.
That's right.
I am going directly to the heart of what they value most, which is their ability to be reelected and to retain the perks, the power, and the opportunities that come with that office in Washington. You either listen to what I'm telling you, or you're gone.
Right. Can I follow up with that just for a moment?
Briefly?
You've got 50 governors. If we can go back to a revitalization of the 10th Amendment, if you go to the fair tax system, no offense, Will, but you can group your governors together under a fair tax system. The federal government, we have a duplication of services, if you want to call them services. We don't need another Department of Agriculture. We don't need another Department of Education, welfare. All of that kind of stuff can be handled on a state level.
I want to interrupt you for a second.
What you do then is then you do starve the beast when you can keep the money in your state capital.
I'm going to interrupt for a second. We don't have a duplication. We have a usurpation.
Yes.
They took power away.
Yes.
We didn't give it to them. They took it.
Yep.
Right.
We have very little time remaining, and you guys have been chomping at the bit.
She has a question.
I'm sorry, did you?
Yeah, she has a question.
Yeah, please.
Just kind of a point, listening to this, I didn't come in with an opinion one way or the other, but I'm wondering if the complexity and the loopholes and all the things in a fair tax implementation plan, might create more government issues, might create more opportunity for fudging and manipulation, and, where if it's a flat, would that be simpler? You mentioned the postcard, format for filing your taxes. Don't we need to get to something simpler and less complicated?
Let me address that.
Go ahead, we'll finish up on that.
Okay. What is simpler than not doing anything? Okay. Under the flat tax, you still have an income tax. You still have to file a return, even if it's only on a postcard. Under the fair tax, you don't file anything. We go.
But it has to be policed. The taxation itself has to be policed. You have to know that the person is,
Well,
paying
right now-
what they're supposed to pay for the item, and they're not, passing it off as something that's used, that's actually, it just seems like there's still
Right.
opportunity for.
Well, right now, we have 120 million taxpayers, plus or minus a few. Under the fair tax, you would have about about 1 million businesses, roughly. So you've got a much smaller regulated population, number one. Number two, the business fills out it's about a page and a half, nominal 2-page, every month. What did they bring in? What did they sell? What's the fair tax applied to it? Send that amount in. So from a mechanism of compliance, it's extremely simple. And as far as cheating is concerned, somebody pays the fair tax. If I'm a business and I don't collect the fair tax from Will when he buys it, then I've got to pay it myself. So somebody somewhere is going to pay it. And that actually goes back to something said, people going overseas to buy stuff and bring it in. John Kerry, when he brings his new yacht into port, is going to pay the fair tax on it, on its fair market value at the time. So he's not going to be able to escape that way.
You're going to have people collecting sales tax at ports all over the country?
Yeah, exactly. You're gonna have a customs and border agent in every home. That's what you're gonna have. Customs and border agent in every home. It's true. You look at online sales, and you look at the fair tax works, especially if you're purchasing like credit card or a debit card, electronic transfer. If it's cash, unless you're gonna have some government entity overlooking everybody's inventory and making sure that things they sell are being paid for and taxes being collected on it. Well, I know Bill real well. He's a friend of mine for years. New car, Well, this is our inventory is sub to you for 10% tax. How do you keep on that extra 10%? You don't pay the 23% tax on it. There's a lot of issues. And you have the same thing with any type of income tax too. Like you have fraud. Both are fraud. That's why in the end, I think creating a simple that you file a tax or postcard, and that limits the power of the IRS. Yes, it doesn't entirely give it to the IRS, but the IRS doesn't need 800,000 employees sitting around in Washington at that point. They need maybe 1,000, if that, to process postcards. That's what you need. You don't. And again, I want to see fair tax in practice. More than I want to see it work. Until then, it's a bunch of numbers in a spreadsheet on paper. And I want to see it work. I think the best way to do it at the state level, I'm interested in fair tax. I'm interested in what it wants to do. I think taxes are great. I've been pushing Kansas to go that route. But I want to see it work. I want to see it in its actual form, function before we adopt it on the federal level.
I have a question for both of you quickly. Are you able to stick around for a little bit after the end of the session to talk to folks in a bit? Do you have time? A little bit? I apologize that no repeat questions, I'm sorry, but these gentlemen will be around for you to ask some of your questions. What I would like to do at this point is finish up with just 5 minutes apiece from you gentlemen to kind of wrap up. Can we start the clock again? Thank you very much. And then finish up from there, and these gentlemen will stick around if you have some follow-up questions, and I apologize we weren't able to get back to you, but I think that would be helpful. Okay?
Yes, Mr. Ron Hood came to see us today, and Patrick is away, and Newton Township's not here, but Ron is running. Again, he's a very conservative. Stand up, Ron. Well, give a little bit of a, just before you stop.
Oh, sure.
My name is Ron Hood. I'm a state legislator here in Ohio, and I have part of Muskingum County and parts of 5 other counties.
Ron, thanks for coming out. Very much appreciate it. So 5 minutes apiece, if we can, please. I believe by the flip of the coin, we were going to have Will finish with your closing statements.
Yep. Listen, fair tax, flat tax, whatever route states decide to go. Again, I think federally that this is a long ways off. Tax reform is going to be a lengthy, drawn-out process that will take a while, at least until 2016. I doubt we can get a vote in Canada this year. At this point, I think the general attitude on the Hill is to hunker down and fly into 2014. Regardless, I want to see it on the state level first. I want to see how it works. And more than anything, the real battle again isn't just the tax code itself. It's where our tax money is going and how it's being spent by the federal government. And there's no way to do that than start with these at this point. We have to find a way to stop the federal government from using our money to basically screw us over, which is what they do. The EPA every day comes up with new regulations that hurt energy consumers in America. The liberals in all kinds of states. Level in Illinois. They want to increase income taxes, they want to increase property taxes, they want to increase the sales tax, and increase everything. You know why? They got a pension problem in Illinois. The state government will say their pension's underfunded by about $60 billion. Sorry. Actual numbers are almost at half a trillion. There's no way they need a federal bailout. They can't do it. These are Democrat policies. The goal is to physically prevent them by constraining the size and scope of government from doing this kind of stuff. I think we can do that through the tax code. I think we can do that through winning elections and reforming government. I think the first step is the Ryan roadmap. And I think that actually has to come first before we really start talking about tax reform. We have to find a way to put in budgetary controls and start block granting some of these social welfare programs. Until we do that, any type of tax money we put forward, the liberals are going to come out kicking and screaming that you're throwing grandma over the cliff, you're throwing babies out the street to starve, everything else. So we have to this is a multi-stage process. It's going to take years. That's just the way things work. I think we've got a lot longer than 10 years before the collapse of America. The debt is a lot. The national debt is very frightening. At the same time, the Chinese aren't going to be calling the debt anytime soon. And in fact, it would be very damaging for them to do that. snowball at the top of the mountain, takes us, it goes down. That's what we need to do. That's what we need to focus on. Ronald Reagan started us down that path. 84 tax reform, 86 tax reform. And I just don't think that any one plan is the solution. Anybody that tells you that, I worry about that. It's a process. I just say, look at tax reform on the state level. You know, no one's come up and been like, overnight, good, we're getting rid of the income tax list. Kansas, we're hoping to maybe get that income tax phased out by 2025. There's probably will be at zero in Kansas. North Carolina, probably about the same time. Some states, Oklahoma, they're looking at 2030, 2040. They'll be at zero if they keep up on the current path they're doing. You know, it's a matter, when you're dealing with the tax system, is a major portion of government funding. It takes a while to lower that down. And federally, yes. You might swap out 1 year the fair tax, or the current income tax for a fair tax. That doesn't mean that you're not going to get an all-Democrat Congress and an all-Democrat White House again. It's going to change everything. And that's something we need to be very wary of. You know, if we had won elections, we wouldn't have had Obamacare. We wouldn't have had President Obama. Maybe we would have held the Senate. Maybe we would have held the House. But that's what we got. Let's just stop Democrats from getting elected. It's kind of hard to stop them from doing things.
Well, thank you very much. Please, sir, 5 minutes.
First off, Will, thank you. I really appreciate you coming. We do believe it's kind of hard to find people that are willing to stand up and defend the flat tax. So I really do appreciate it. I'm looking forward to other opportunities in the future. How many people knew or know that the Ryan plan actually had a consumption tax in it? And he was forced to take it out by House leadership. So when people talk about the Ryan plan, I like to think we're talking about the original one that basically had the fair tax in it. Because Ryan's a pretty smart guy. And he recognized the advantages of fair tax in terms of growing America, growing the economy. The one thing that bothers me, though, is too many people tell me that we can't do it, that we don't have the ability to get rid of something that was put in overnight. 100 years ago, we went from in December having no income tax to January having an income tax. So we got into this situation, if you will, overnight. And I'll be honest with you, I live in America. We can do things. We can take and recognize that we made a mistake 100 years ago and throw that bathwater out. We can get rid of the garbage and we can change it. We don't have to wait another 50 years for the right phase of the moon, the conjunction of the stars to happen. It is in our hands. We're the same people that created this country, or the sons and daughters thereof. We're the same people that traveled to the moon. We're the same people that invented the internet, Al Gore notwithstanding. We can do things if we decide we're going to do that, and if we are willing to make the personal commitment to do that. It's not easy walking up to a Pat T-Berry and looking him in the eye and saying, Pat, do you support the fair tax? Will you vote for it? Will you co-sponsor it? And when he says no, say, I'm sorry. I am not going to donate to you. I am not going to support you. I'm going to look for a different candidate. And again, I have nothing against Pat. I'm sure he's a really nice guy. But the fact of the matter is, we have to be willing to make changes,
Amen.
Okay? We are not going to be able to ease our way inch by inch, make a little progress, and then give it up when the Democrats get in power. Or make a little progress and we have a bad economy. We are going to have to commit ourselves to fundamentally changing the way we do taxes, the way we fund the necessary functions of government. And again, we'll argue about what those are later. Let's get this job done first. Change the way we do the taxes, change the relationship between we the people and they the government, and change the way we look at ourselves and the people that are supposed to be working for us. Now, it's up to you. I can talk about it all day. It's something I'm reasonably good at. What I need is for you to be good at what you can do. And that's two things. You have time and you have treasure. You need to take your time and allocate some of it to advancing the fair tax. You take your treasure and help those people that support the fair tax either get into office or get the ones that oppose the fair tax out of office. You have to do it. It can't be done by me, it can't be done by Will, it can't be done by Bill. Although Bill did a wonderful job today, I will say that. So the question of what we're going to have, am I out of time? Oh.
I don't want you to be able to finish your sentence. How about a round of applause for both Steve and Bill? I would just like to say one last word. One great way to be involved, if you're joining us today and you're not part of the Zanesville Patriots, all three of us are from out of town, but all of us know Kate Clymer and the leader of Zanesville Patriots. Look them up online. You can't help but find them. There's information out front that's a great way to get involved in this and a number of different efforts, and we hope that you do so. Thanks again to Carol and Glenn. Yes?
There's a table with literature.
Table with literature about the Zanesville Patriots. If you're joining us for the first time, please do. It's a great way to get involved if you're local here. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you so much, everyone.